Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash.
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 Phase 2 presents Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. Tune in to the live opening. Join our virtual conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first National Honey Bee Show Training Workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus St. Lucia.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of our country conference. Our theme, Visioning Sustainable Futures, Confronting the Threats of Climate Change and Climate Variability. My name is Ember Charles. I am the moderator. I'm the chair of the Jeff SGPU NDP National Steering Committee for St. Lucia. Jeff is a partner in this conference with the UWI. Not with us, just to remind you briefly, our focus though was on climate change and its impact on the fisheries sector. We looked at policy issues, climate change treatment of the destruction of our landscapes, our seascapes and skyscapes in the fiction and narrative. And this morning, our first presenter is Shelian Cox, who I'll introduce in a short while. Shelian Cox will be presenting on the topic. During the course of the day, we inviting all participants and presenters to complete the evaluation of the conference, essentially looking at how you assess the presenters and the presentations, and also the conference on a whole. So let's go with our first publish after how many years of the drought. Shelian Cox, who's our first presenter, is an early career postdoc research associate at the Center for Management and Environmental Studies, FUMIS in Barbados. That's the University of the West Indies, Keeville campus. She holds an interdisciplinary PhD in Natural Resources Management from Keeville campus, a BSc Honors in Environmental and Natural Resources Management with Marine Biology from UWI St. Augustine campus. Shelian has 4 years experience in applied interdisciplinary climate-related research and 10 years experience in fisheries management research. Prior to her appointment at CERMES, Shelian worked for 4 years at the Caribbean Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology, CIMH. Her main tasks included the development of climate impacts database and assisting with the development of early warning information systems across climate timescales for climate-sensitive sectors in the Caribbean. Shelian is adept at stakeholder engagement. She is well known for building, supporting, and sustaining positive and productive relationships with stakeholders in the Caribbean fishing industry. She has a unique aptitude of being immersed in fishing communities and has worked closely with the Caribbean Network for Fisherfolk Organizations, CNFO, since 2017. In her role as Deputy Chairperson of the Fisheries Advisory Committee in Barbados, Shelian engages with representatives of various government agencies, including the Fisheries Division and the Ministry of Maritime Affairs, and to make a presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. It's a pleasure being here this morning. A pleasant good morning to everyone listening. I'm quite pleased to be able to present on such an important issue, climate change impact on the Caribbean fishery sector. Now, this presentation is a part of an ongoing project called the Climate Change Adaptation in the Eastern Caribbean Fisheries Project. Is one of our information products that we would have prepared. I've adapted it slightly for this audience, but we intend that this presentation can be presented by fisheries management authorities and other stakeholders in the country to raise the awareness, not only around the impacts and the climate stressors, but also around what ongoing adaptation measures have been happening and what supporting policy actions can be put in place to reduce vulnerability and increase the resilience to climate risk in the Caribbean. I also thank my co-authors, Professor Oxenford and Dr. Monroe from FAO, for their support in developing this presentation. Before I get into the climate stressors, just wanted to start by reminding us why the climate is changing. And this sets the context for the stressors I'm going to outline, as well as the impact pathways. Of course, much discussion has gone about in the past, yesterday, especially about why climate is changing. And of course, this rapid climate change is affecting the entire world as a result of the ongoing release and buildup of greenhouse gases in the Earth's atmosphere. So you can see, the heat being trapped, and this results in some of the impacts. So what are the main climate stressors that are most relevant for the Caribbean? There are warmer seas, sea level rise, strong hurricanes, less predictable sea conditions, changes to ocean currents, extreme weather, and ocean acidification. So we know warmer seas are associated with warmer in temperatures, sea level rise as a result of the melting ice and the expansion of the ocean water as it heats, stronger hurricanes and more destructive hurricanes resulting from the warmer sea temperatures, as well as the increase in the levels of moisture in the atmosphere, strong winds, all of them causing the stronger hurricanes, which we've been seeing. The transport of green water from South America to the Caribbean, we'll talk about how this impacts that. Extreme weather events, droughts, intense rainfall, ocean acidification, of course, from the increase in the absorption of the atmospheric carbon dioxide by the ocean. So first up, warmer sea temperatures. Now I'm going to use some graphs from the IPCC fifth assessment report. That's the latest in 2013. We know that they are in process of now releasing the sixth assessment report, and we look forward to the results of that. But looking at these two scenarios where we have business as usual and low emissions. Business as usual is if we continue as is and we don't lower our carbon dioxide emissions. Low emissions scenario, of course, is what we hope that we would do in terms of aggressive reductions in emissions across the globe. And warmer air temperatures, of course, result in the warmer seas. And here in the Caribbean, the sea has warmed by approximately 1.5 degrees over the last century. And furthermore, by the end of this century, Caribbean sea temperature is expected to rise on average of another 1.4 degrees Celsius compared to the temperature experienced in the period 1986 to 2005. And the rising of temperatures will be faster in some parts of the Caribbean, the tropical Western Atlantic. For example, in northern Brazil, it's expected to heat up faster than the central Caribbean Sea. And in addition, seasonal changes in sea temperatures are expected to decrease. So right now, the seasonal temperature change is about 3.3 degrees Celsius. It's expected to drop to just 2.3 Celsius difference over years. So we see here what we have seen in the first panel and what we expect with a business as usual. And this would be based on some work by colleagues, Nurse and Shallery, 2015, showing how the temperatures will change in the future. And you could see here by looking at the legend, you see how the temperatures are expected to increase over time. We're looking at higher sea levels again using the business as usual scenario and the low emission scenario. And we see that the Caribbean is tracking global changes. And by tracking global changes, what is the model predictions? And of course, this is work on downscaling these predictions to the Caribbean circumstance. Under the business as usual scenario, the sea levels could rise between 0.5 and 1 meters by the end of the century. Under the low emission scenario, the prediction is sea level is expected to rise between 0.3 and 0.6. And the observations, of course, is based to date, which show slow mean sea level rise in the Caribbean of around 1.8 millimeters per year. And some of the work done by our colleagues under the CC for Fish project, as I said, a downscale model shows the results here of work done for Antigua, indicating that expected sea level rise is reaching just over 1 meter under the business as usual scenario and around 0.3 under the low emission scenario. Now, stronger hurricanes, what have we seen? Looking at the decade 1970 to 2019, sorry, and what are we to expect? Now, projections are uncertain and varied widely, but there's likely to increase in intensity, more category 4 and 5 hurricanes, very likely to have greater coastal inundation or flooding, and very likely to have higher associated rainfall. And you can see this illustrated here. And last year, there was expected to be, 16 named tropical storms with gusts over 100 kilometers. And we see every year that the forecasts are suggesting more intense, stronger hurricanes. Now, changing currents and sea conditions. Now, part of our research always brings us to speaking to fisher folk about their observations, integrating that scientific knowledge we have with their local knowledge of observing these changes over sometimes, in some cases, 50 years or more. So they're reporting increased storminess, more dangerous waves, unpredictable winds, changes to tides and currents, more seawater, more green water, and sargassum. And what do we expect? Some people think that some suggest that wave heights may lower, green water may be around for longer, and then we now know and has been researched, and there's agreement that sargassum is likely to continue for the foreseeable future. Looking at extreme rainfall and drought, this is a graph taken from our colleague Trotman 2019 at CIMH. This is what we've seen in the Caribbean, looking from 1975 to 2016. We can see how the years that have been extremely wet, those that have been exceptionally dry. Of course, the big highlight is the 2010 drought, which sometimes is slow moving and onset events. We don't really see the impacts, but from all accounts, when we do look at some of the research that was done into the impacts of the drought, there were losses in millions of losses over that time. So yeah, we need also to look out for these extreme rainfall or droughts. We would see other indications there of other events, 2015 as well, being a very dry and extreme rainfall and drought. Again, another product from CIMH. This is their standard precipitation index products. They have one that's a monitor, part of the Caribbean and drought precipitation monitoring network, and then they have the outlook. So looking at the latest product that has been released, this one looks at rainfall amounts over January to December 2020. And we can see the areas where it is exceptionally dry and where it's exceptionally wet. So these products really help to inform decision making, but also gives us some early warning as well too when we're looking to apply these decision makings for sector specific decisions. And then looking at the outlook. So we looked at the monitor now and we're looking at the outlook. So what to expect up to the end of the century, 2100, Caribbean islands can expect more frequent droughts, more severe droughts, more heavy rainfall events. Now, this is the alert levels to the end of May. Oh, sorry, this should be May 2021. And we can see what is expected. Ocean acidification. And we know ocean acidification as a change, measured as a change in pH of seawater. The lower the pH, the more acid the water. The higher the pH, the more alkaline the water is. So again, another climate change stressor that has been identified and is evident in the Caribbean. So what have we seen here? We see the saturation rate decreasing. Of course, it becomes less suitable for calcifying organisms, and we can expect increased sea surface acidity in the Caribbean. And looking here to the decade of 1850 to 1860, we can see the changes. So as illustrated here, corals and other carbonate organisms, they need the cooler colors. And right now we can see lots of red there. So based on the prediction, we can expect significant impacts. So just to summarize a bit of what was said before, for warmer seas, in terms of the climate stressors for warmer seas, we can expect increased temperatures of 1.4 to 2.2 degrees Celsius and a smaller temperature range. For sea level rise, what we expect is increased 1 meter. For stronger hurricanes, more category 4 and 5 storms, and maximum wind speeds up by 11%. Less predictable sea conditions, slightly smaller waves, more green water. Changes to currents. Now, these are still a bit of unknowns. A lot of research is still going there, so we haven't put a conclusive suggestion there. Extreme weather, more heavy rainfall events, and more periods of drought. And then ocean acidification, the increase of pH, and of course, the 32% lower carbonate saturating state of seawater. So that's what we can expect in the Caribbean by 2100. Now, looking at the impacts, now that we know the stressors, it's best to illustrate this using impact pathways. So we have the stressors here on the right and the impact pathways. So of course, it affects the fisheries sector, it affects the biological productivity, captured fisheries, aquaculture, community livelihoods, governance, and then the wider society. So as it relates to biological productivity, the impacts on the ecology of marine habitats and the physiology of the marine organisms will affect biological productivity. Captured fisheries, there may be changes in the sustainable yield available to capture fisheries, and the effectiveness of capture techniques may be impacted as well. There might be some alterations to conditions for aquaculture, for instance, droughts, affecting the availability of water, effects on the well-being of coastal communities and fisherfolk livelihoods. There would be some implications for governance, of course, and then, of course, knock-on effects in wider society and the economy. Now, looking at the specific impacts first, and then we'll get back to summarize the impact pathways. So less oxygen in the water. So critically low oxygen means fish kills, expanding dead zones, slower growth, and less living space for pelagic species like billfish and tunas. And of course, this less oxygen in the water is a result of the warming sea temperatures. Coral bleaching, again, as a result of warming sea temperatures. Mass coral bleaching means high coral mortality and loss of reef integrity. So, on the left here, we have illustrated coral bleaching. In some cases, the coral may bounce back. Some species are more resilient than others, but in other cases, it leads to death. What could be impacted here too is less living space for reef fishes and lobsters that like the rugosity of the reefs and stuff to hide. And then of course, reefs protect our coastline. They absorb wave energy as well too, and this is a significant impact. The warmer sea temperatures also represent a scenario where sargassum would proliferate. We know that, sargassum influxes have been attributed to warm ocean temperatures as well as nutrient inputs. So now we've been seeing influxes. Actually, we're seeing influxes now in Barbados again. We've had reports of Montserrat, St. Kitts, Guadeloupe as well, all happening right now. And these mass strandings cause oxygen depletion and fish kills as well, drowning of sea turtles. We lost about 30-something sea turtles in one influx event in Barbados. That was in 2018. Damage to beaches, smothering and loss of critical fish habitats. Also leads to clogging of harbors and bays, impedes navigation. Fisher folk have reported damage to boat engines overheating, of course, because of the sargassum getting into their intake systems. As it relates to health impacts, the release of toxic hydrogen sulfide gas as the weed rots, the bad smell affecting fish markets and the health of fisher folk and those persons in coastal communities. Damage to tourism as well, loss of additional livelihood for opportunities for fisher folk. And beyond those impacts, specific impacts to the fishery sector, we have damage to fishing gear. In conversations with a longline fisher, he lost over $8,000 in fishing gear because of when they would set it at sea, and it get tangled in the sargassum, causing significant loss of fishing time as well, because the sargassum is at the landing sites, blocking the fishers from going out and being able to fish. We've seen reduced flying fish catches definitely in Barbados from 2011. You can see illustrated here in the graph. Landing of smaller dolphin fish. I know many of you may have seen some of the smaller sizes of dolphin fish on the market. Loss of income for fishers, vendors, and processors. So it's also affecting actors across the value chain, the fisheries value chain, and loss of food security. Sargassum is not all bad. It is beneficial at sea. It could improve ocean productivity, higher biodiversity supported, availability of new fishery species as well have come on stream. Many of you would have seen the almaco jacks or almerfish, as we will call it, reports of smaller lobsters being seen. And of course, there is exploring sargassum as an opportunity, new income from harvesting and uses. And there are many uses that can be explored, from construction, activated carbon, to cosmetics, and so on. Now, fish poisoning, another impact associated with the warmer sea temperatures. Warmer temperatures, of course, increase the likelihood of fish spoiling, increases the occurrence of Ciguataria poisoning as well, affects marketing and human health impacts. Toxic algal blooms, again, become more frequent with warmer waters and high nutrient loads, which leads to shellfish and fish kills. And of course, it is a human health hazard. We spoke about ocean acidification earlier, and the specific impact is that fewer carbonate ions and more hydrogen ions means increased difficulty for building shells for organisms like conch. The coral reef framework may erode. You see here illustrated nerve damage to fish larvae as well, and low fish population replacement. As it relates to sea level rise, some of the impacts that we've been seeing: coastal erosion, of course, more flooding with storm surge, damage to critical fish habitats, destruction of coastal property and aquaculture ponds. And this picture in the bottom left is actually St. Lucia, there in Labrie, where we can see some of the erosion that exposes the vulnerability of some of the lockers, fisher lockers on the site. Stronger hurricanes, some of these pictures were taken, the bottom left is Dominica after Hurricane Maria, top right in the Bahamas. So massive damage to fishery gear, boats, and infrastructure. Loss of property and livelihoods. Decreased safety of fisherfolk at sea, and damage to critical fish habitats. So all of these impacts are already evident in the Caribbean. And you know, our fisherfolk are on the front line in this battle against climate change. And at stake is food security, as well as even our coastal heritage. Flooding, of course, damages infrastructures, disrupts fish supply and value chains. Now, I have quite a few more slides, but I'm going to try to summarize it quickly in 3 minutes. Looking at extreme weather, this is how the drought might limit the water supply that supports fish processing, aquaculture. The changes to fish populations reduce spawning success and replenishment of stocks. You might start seeing smaller stock sizes. And of course, the fish distributions will change with rising sea temperatures as stocks start to move northwards. So these impact pathways, disruption of marine food webs, damage to critical habitats, as we would have mentioned before, capture fisheries, we will see lower yields, change in species caught, reduced safety at sea, aquaculture. You may see some increase in disease incidences, increasing operational costs, loss of income, reduced well-being as it relates to the impact pathway on communities and livelihoods. Governance, now important changes to appropriate geographical scales if we have stocks moving. Increased importance of utilizing fisherfolk and scientific knowledge to contribute to, you know, ongoing adaptation measures. And wider society and economy, we have increased poverty and reliance on social protection, reduced food security and nutrition. So looking at some ongoing adaptation measures very quickly, early warning, there have been some apps developed by Fisheries, as well as the Fura app that fisherfolk have been using, some products from CIMH, as well as the Sargassum Alert Bulletin that we're producing at Suriname to offer early warning information, safety at sea training, so that fisherfolk are armed with the knowledge of how to be, you know, put measures in place to be safe at sea, and how to use the emergency equipment to call for help if need be. Looking at added value and product traceability, which is a very important issue nowadays. We see, you know, I recently saw a Subway article saying that Subway's tuna that they're marketing may not be tuna, is a mix of other fish, hence why traceability is important. Market diversification, the shift now to amber fish because of the decrease in flying fish and dolphin fish numbers. We see some climate-proof infrastructure here. This is the Bridgetown Fishing Complex in Barbados, and you could see climate proofing of the infrastructure. We see energy efficiency from solar panels, that solar powered battery chargers, 4-stroke engines, insurance schemes being piloted, of course, by the World Coast, of course, is CRIFT and World Bank initiative being piloted, but there's some development of innovative predictive parametric insurance for the sector, capacity building, things like alternative livelihoods, training around sea moss farming, continue to build knowledge and awareness through policy briefs, brochure, this presentation itself, revising policy formulation, making sure that climate change is mainstreamed in existing policies and plans, and governance flexibility, highlighting the recent climate change adaptation and disaster risk management protocol, which is an annex to the Caribbean Common Fisheries Policy. Stakeholder engagement, of course, spoke about the adaptation measures, but these are some supporting policy actions that are needed. Continued stakeholder engagement so that our adaptation measures are suited for the local context, ensuring adaptation measures consider gender differences and capitalize on specific skill sets of women, men, and youth, and improving sustainable livelihoods, social protection as well, and of course improving engagement and support of the private sector to leverage investment in the fisheries sector, facilitate innovation and decrease risks. So I had to speed up there at the end, but I hope that it was clear that there is a lot being done. Several strides are being made for the ongoing adaptation measures in the fisheries sector, but we still have some work to do, and there are the recommendations for the supporting policy actions. We are still on the front line in the battle against climate change, and fishers are still fighting to maintain their incomes and catches and livelihoods. I think even at stake, the fisheries sector is still at stake, and it needs to be seen as one of the important contributions to the emerging blue economy sector. And then and only then, I believe that we could get the type of actions that are needed to chart the way forward towards a resilient Caribbean fisheries sector. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Shelian, and to your co-authors, Moreno and Oxenford is the name?
Yes, Professor Oxenford, yes.
Right. I think very, very detailed and good, excellent presentation. I was a bit struck by your last slide, the photograph, which with an empty canoe approaching the pitons. It's loaded with meaning, but that's not the point of our discussion today. Of course, I'm sure that there'll be lots of questions. I know we have some of the participants who have been associated with the work that you're doing, and if Silmies as well. So I would now like to invite our participants, those on the various platforms, to field their questions to you, either through the Zoom or through the Facebook. I'll keep on monitoring the Facebook. So you can start, but while you're thinking, I was struck also by one point you made about climate proofing infrastructure. Is there such a thing as climate proofing infrastructure? Or you've just coined it?
So this is a term that has been used in our circles in terms of making existing structures more resilient to things like increased wave activity and so on. Things like groins too might be considered climate proofing as well to reduce some of the increased wave action we've been seeing. So you would see in that picture a lot of the dolos, as the fisher folk refer to them as, that secures the complex, the fisheries complex in Barbados.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I associate proofing like with bulletproof.
Oh, okay.
Nothing should get through it.
Yes, some kind of defense mechanism. I believe things like innovative jetty, new jetty designs and so on are also considered in the climate-proof infrastructure.
The participants, you could just raise your hand or unmute, those of you who are close to us in the Zoom. Those of you who are following on the other platforms can just put your question through either Facebook or YouTube. And just to keep ourselves ticking, I think somebody's hand is up, admin.
Hi, good morning. Yes, Mr. Charles. I was just wondering, Shelian has provided so much information. I was just wondering how receptive our governments are to this sort of, the huge amount of information being gathered. Because at the end of the day, that information needs to be used to make a difference.
Yes, well, I guess in our sector, we've been trying things, of course, coming from academia, we've published a lot, but this is not necessarily the platforms that policy makers seek to get their information. So recently we've trying to use platforms like policy briefs, even social media campaigns to try to raise the awareness by simplifying the messages as well. I still think that we are not doing enough. And we need, of course, to really partner with persons who have the expertise in communications and marketing to really get this information across. I have ideas for guerrilla marketing, that kind of provocative marketing that makes people feel uncomfortable. That might be a way to start conversations that we have. There are platforms like the Caribbean Regional Fisheries Mechanism Ministerial Council every year where some of these issues are raised, which has led to that protocol of CCA and DRM that's a part of the fisheries policy. But yes, I still think that we need to distill the messages some more and, partner with persons who, have the expertise in capturing general public's and policymakers' attention.
Thank you, Shelian. Any other questions?
Hi, Amber.
Yes, Giles.
Hi, Dr. Cox. Thanks for an excellent presentation. I'm wondering, the seas are getting very hazardous out there. And the catches are declining.
Yes.
And more we see aquaponics and mariculture being proposed as adaptive methods. Yet in the aquaculture sector, we are stuck to one species, tilapia, Mozambique, I think it's called. And there are issues with that as well. The undue assemblage of one species in one place can cause proliferation of disease, which is a principle of ecological principle. What other species do you see on the horizon that could be used to enter our aquaponics tanks in the Caribbean? Where are experiments being undertaken to determine the suitability relative to tilapia, the hardiness of tilapia, and so on? Is there any experimentation being undertaken in the Caribbean in that area?
I know some experimentation is really around crayfish. The species, I am not an aquaculture expert, I should say, from the get-go. I like captured fisheries and the ocean. But there are some experience around crayfish, of course, a higher priced species, and of course, quite hardy as well too. Lots of interest though in mariculture. Barbados did have a mariculture operation raising dolphin fish, mahi-mahi, and it's something that should be explored. In my experience though, I think aquaculture may not necessarily be the best alternative livelihood for fishers. We've seen slow uptake of aquaculture with fisher folk. At the end of the day, the fisher folk are called to the sea. It's a part of them, something that's passed down from generation to generation. We've seen better uptake with stuff like sea moss farming, but aquaculture for sure seems to be something that persons in the agriculture sector gravitate towards, and the aquaponics as well too. Also something good for engagement of youth, and first, trying to, get their interests, through aquaponics, and then seeing how they could be engaged in small scale fisheries.
And any work yet on toxic chemicals in our pelagics and so on? As a Jeff person, I'm concerned about undue chemical buildup in our food chain, and have fish and very susceptible to that. Any work being done in that? And because as we talk about mariculture and so on, then I start to think of contaminants on the land-based sources of pollution, and I begin to ask myself, people like Chris Corbin up in UNEP in Jamaica will tell you about the increasing contamination and pollution, and we in the Caribbean as well, we've done some work in St. Lucia through some of our projects. I'm deeply concerned that our flexibility is declining, and I am not too sure yet where we're going to go, but whatever policy recommendations would have to transcend the marine and into the terrestrial as well, because somehow we have to get a solution that perhaps is closer to shore and even on shore,
Yes, I definitely agree. No, I guess the science is still catching up with things. I know we get reports of more incidents of cigarette poisoning in the northern islands, particularly with barracuda. And it's different in the southern part, because, in Barbados and some of the southern Caribbean countries, we eat a lot of barracuda. It's quite high priced as well. But more research needs to be done on this. I know colleagues in other universities are exploring it, but no project or significant research being done in the Caribbean now on cigarette poisoning or even the toxic effects on, larger pelagics.
Thank you very much.
Or even with the fisheries division, because, there has been plenty of discussions about enhancing the research and development units of the fisheries divisions in the Caribbean. And again, a policy directive that is needed if we are going to be dynamic and adapt to these, rapid changes that we've been experiencing in the last years.
Thank you, Shelian. We have a question from Victor David, or I'm not too sure if it's David Victor, of our Facebook. I just want to read it to you. Say, thanks, Shelian, for this excellent and informative presentation. I just wanted to know, is there a regionally considered institutional approach to fight climate change in the Caribbean?
Well, there is, 5Cs does have a policy directive around addressing climate change. It does need updating. However, they would have started that initiative, and then we see how the other Caribbean agency would have fed into that program of action. There still needs to be a bit more coordination, especially as it relates to sectoral focus. There are other platforms. Spoke a bit about the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology, and they have a consortium of sectoral partners in the region. So representation from tourism with CTO, agriculture with CARDI, CARFA for health, and they all sit around a table and look at the climate services that need to be provided in order to inform the decisions that need to be made. I know Dr. Van der Beek, Cedric, my colleague from CNH, presented yesterday, and they are providing quite a bit of climate information products that can be tailored to different sectors. They're producing climatic bulletins for the tourism and the health sector, agricultural sector as it relates now. There is a specific bulletin for fisheries, But the Sargassum Outlook Bulletin seeks to try to, create that climate product to offer some guidance. So there are several initiatives, not necessarily coordinated, but I would say that the 5Cs initiative would seek to really centralize and coordinate a kind of response in the region. We do have a lot of climate policies as well, or climate change being mainstreamed in sectoral policies. But yes, there needs to be, I guess, a leader. 5Cs could be that leader, and integration with the other sectoral CARICOM agencies in the Caribbean.
Mr. Chair, just one more point, if you don't mind. I'm actually deeply concerned about the fisheries sector in the Caribbean. Declining species, the impacts of climate change and so on, increasing pollution in the coastal zone and areas beyond national jurisdiction and so on. And I'm doubly concerned because when I speak to fishers, I would have liked to see what I'm about to say in our local dialect. Maybe you have catches in our territorial waters. I remember one big one passing said, by land, we serve this by Shinwa. But I don't know if you want to. You're the papa who are the solution.
Well, go ahead.
Not see sufficient cohesion, one might say, and coming together to contend with that, because where you have, fish in abundance, and then we have foreign intrusion, and because our protein source is declining, and I'm telling you, we have experimented with other forms. You're going to have a serious deficit in protein, and our palates are uniquely North American, very, very to change political issues, the diplomatic issues, and so on.
I think that these have been, I don't know if you're familiar with the Caribbean Large Marine Ecosystem, that platform, the Strategic Action Plan that actually identifies, habitat degradation, land-based sources of pollution, and overfishing as these three great impacts on our system. Now, the Strategic Action Plan now has this interim coordinating mechanism, an MOU between UNEP and the Caribbean Environment Program, IOC Caribbean, and so this is, I would think, is the best governance coordinating mechanism existing right now to try to, offer that policy directive towards the governance of our resources. The associated protocols and so on that we need to adhere to is a big part of their mandate as well. And someone would have referred to Chris as well and others doing a lot to make sure that these protocols are adhered to. But I see that as that coordinating mechanism as it relates right now. And, many of the persons that sit on that interim ICM, as we call it, are very knowledgeable about and have good recommendations to make about the governance of these issues. You raised a good point. I mean, we see these in the marine spatial planning type of discussions. Fishers are also always the ones who tend to suffer in MSPs. They tend to get all of the no fishing zones. Yet we talk about the polluter pays principle, other actors, and I get it a lot here in Barbados with my work and what's going on right now. Even in light of COVID, tourism is always the priority. And, we haven't done the studies to really say what impact fishing is really having on the marine environment. We are quite data poor fisheries, but we keep pointing fingers to fisher folk. And, you know, there's an uprising, and the fisherfolk are advocated from themselves. The Caribbean Network of Fisherfolk Organizations is doing a good job. They've just finished a regional code of conduct that sets the direction from where they want to take fisheries in the future. So there are some strides being made, albeit probably a bit rather slowly, because, you know, we are still trying to catch up with climate change, something that is beyond our control. But I tend to want to remain optimistic. But I think more has been done to really show the importance of fisheries. Sadly, the contribution of the fishery sector to the GDP is always small, but that is because, again, data poor. The fisheries, we can't really show our value because, you know, the landings data, there's associated issues with the collection of the data as it should be. But if we look at how fisheries really supports the tourism sector and we really value it as it should be, we would see that we should be paying more attention and investing more in this sector, knowing that it's a climate sensitive sector. And I did enjoy time in St. Lucia with some sea egg divers for my research. So, but my patois is a bit bad now. But yeah, I would have had countless conversations, long interviews with people like Tig and Labrie, as well to a fish port leader seen there about the changes and what they're experiencing.
Thank you, Shelian. Thank you very for your presentation. Our time is up, but we just had one question from Tessa Smith on Facebook, and she simply asked, "What about lobster and conch farm?"
Started lobster and conch farming. Our Mexican colleagues too have been doing things like building little, I call them little apartments for conch, for lobsters, where they can, you know, hide in areas where the reef habitat has been destroyed. So there are some examples, some lessons learned that can be shared. But of course, all of this takes money and a lot of capacity building to be transferred to other locations. But there are quite good examples. There's also sea eggs, which is close to my heart, examples for raising sea urchins, chardon in the St. Lucian sense. But of course, these need to be things that can be explored, that require funding for sustainability.
Thank you very much. Folks, we just heard the presentation and discussion on the topic, the impact of climate change on the fisheries sector, which was, of course, led off by Dr. Shelian Cox. And through you, we just applauded her for our presentation. And hoping that you could stay with us, because I'm sure there will be some projects funded, which of course may assist in your own continuing research, so forth. Just to close it off, the image was against this empty canoe, which you presented near the Peters, to really present the dilemma that we face in the fisheries sector in the Caribbean as we go forward. Thank you once again. Shanna is the program officer. She will be presenting on the very brief bio, which I will just read. Government of St. Lucia, first in the fisheries department, and then in sustainable development, where she focused on climate change programs in marine affairs and resource management from the Taiwan Ocean University.
Hi, good morning all. Happy to be here. All right, so this morning I will be speaking on knowledge management and knowledge platforms with a focus on the OECS region. So I'm sure everybody who's been a part of this conference for the last 2 days, we've spoken about climate change in the Eastern Caribbean region. And not just climate change. Here in the Eastern Caribbean, we live in one of the most hazard-prone regions. We, of course, have volcanic eruptions, which we've, in the last couple of months, been reminded of. seismic activity, storms and hurricanes, and further to that, drought. Climate change adds a new dimension to all of this. We have a possible sea level rise of up to 1 meter in the future, stronger storms, an increase in flash floods, looking at storm surge and the heights that these storms will be coming into, these waves will be coming into the inland of our region, higher temperatures, anywhere from 1 to 5 degrees Celsius by 2100, an increase in the number of heat waves, and overall less rain, which of course will lead to more droughts throughout our region. So climate change for us does not have many benefits. A few of the climate change impacts, which we've discussed over the last 2 days, and I think we're going to continue to discuss today, as it relates to various sectors. So for example, in the water sector, which across the region continues to be a sector that really is impacted negatively by climate change, we see that while our populations are continuing to grow, we also put a higher demand on the water that we have, but there's less water available. There's been tremendous damage to our infrastructure in terms of dams and other water supply systems. And of course, not having water can have spill-off effects into human health, agriculture, and tourism. When we look at the agriculture sector itself, of course, we know here in St. Lucia, storm damage is very real, and it happens even with storms that are not considered to be hurricanes or very strong storms. Our agriculture sector can be negatively impacted and badly so. Of course, droughts are going to lead to damage to our agriculture as well. An increase in pests and diseases, that resilience, that good time of healthy soil, healthy rain, lots of sunshine gives our plants they're going to lose because they're going to be stressed from the storm damage and the droughts and the fluctuation between those two. We expect to see changes in soil fertility. And of course, I think we've already observing some of that seasonal variability as it relates to what crops are available at what times of the year. As it comes to coastal ecosystems, we expect to see more coastal flooding, coral bleaching as a result of increase in sea surface temperatures, ocean acidification, which is considered to be a slow onset event. So it will not impact us right now, but over time, the acidification of the ocean can lead to serious breakdowns in our corals, which of course would have effects for our major fisheries. Of course, coral reefs and seagrass beds, because of sea level rise, they can be submerged at sea levels that they would not be able to survive. And as Shelian just spoke about, some of the changing fisheries impacts that we expect to see, such as changing in fish migration patterns. Housing and building. So we're seeing an increase in storm damage on our buildings, but also looking at higher indoor temperatures due to an increase in overall surface temperature. All right, and human health and wellness. Of course, climate change makes us more susceptible to vector-borne diseases. There's a higher risk of hygiene-related diseases and having outbreaks of such, an increased risk of heat stroke. And of course, that's going to have effects on our children in classrooms, which are in buildings that were not built to deal with the changes that are coming, and also severe damage to our health facilities from storms, but also the increase in temperature. So overall, climate change challenges affect every aspect of our life, and it calls for a wide range of effective and innovative solutions. And that's something I think this conference has really been discussing. Now, for a long time, many saw climate change as the business of governments and diplomats, right? However, now we're in a place where we can say now almost everyone feels it, and who feels it knows it. And so we need to get everyone involved. We need to understand how people experience and view climate change and how we plan our actions around those views and experiences. We also need to engage people from the ground up and work with them to develop appropriate and impactful solutions for their climate challenges, and also to ensure that we have access to the knowledge and skills to act appropriately. And that's going to be the focus of the rest of my talk, this last bullet, where we look at how we are working to engage in order to have access to that knowledge that's needed and skills needed. One of the approaches that has been widely used is that of ecosystem-based adaptation, or EBA. And that's really the use of biodiversity and ecosystem services as part of an overall adaptation strategy. And that's in order to help people to adapt to the adverse effects of climate change. Now, effectively implemented, EBA can help to sustain livelihoods, build community resilience, reduce financial costs of adaptation, and reduce the need for repeated project-based interventions, which is currently how most islands within our region are really addressing some of their challenges. Another aspect to this would be gender equality and social inclusion. And that really focuses on delivering equal rights, opportunity, and mainstream services to all citizens, including women, the poor, and marginalized or excluded groups. It recognizes that there's a gender differentiated vulnerabilities to climate change impacts, as well as the differentiated strengths to adapt to these changes, right? So we don't all experience climate change the same. And we also take into account the particular vulnerabilities of marginalized and high-risk social groups, such as the poor, the elderly, children, and the mentally and physically challenged. One of the major barriers to effective climate change action is data, information, and knowledge. And many developing countries, and especially small island developing states like here in St. Lucia, lack all of these within coordinated mechanisms, but there are a few bright spots of this data, information, and knowledge. So we're going to start with a national response to knowledge gaps, and we're going to start right here in St. Lucia. So St. Lucia developed their National Environmental Information System, or the NEIS. It was developed in 2018. The NEIS houses all environmental data in St. Lucia, including data related to climate change. This is a shared site that is supported by 17 other government and NGO, or non-governmental agencies, with responsibility for reporting on multinational environmental agreements, or MEAs. Now, the NEIS, of course, allows for all these agencies to input their data, and it's a shared storage facility, and it also has all the reports that can be generated based on that data. And it's free for the public as well as to agencies that may need it. So as students who may be engaging in any kind of research, this is a very good source to get your information. St. Lucia's NEIS further has identified more than 35 indicators related to the 3 main multilateral environmental agreements, or MEAs. And the 3 that are focused on right now in the NEIS are the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. There are 18 indicators that are monitored under the climate change portfolio. Right, so that was the national response to our knowledge gaps. Now I'm going to share with you some of OECS's response to these gaps. So in 2020, OECS launched the Adaptation project, which focuses on ecosystem-based adaptation, gender equality, and social inclusion, which I defined before. The major outputs of this project included the integration of citizen participation into the local context, promotion of action-based approaches for capacity building, and the development of digital solutions to encourage sustainability and increased stakeholder interaction. So we recently launched a toolkit to promote EBA and gender equality and social inclusion. And it also includes case studies from within our region. This toolkit is accessible on the OECS website. And out of the digital solutions component, it was found that within the OECS region, there are several local experts in the fields of EBA and GESI. However, no one had one place where this could be found. And many people throughout our region are working in this, and we may not all be aware of that. So a database was developed And it houses right now information on all the experts in the various climate change, but also climate change as it relates to gender equality and social inclusion experts. And these experts can be found, you have their CVs on there. And so you can always reach out if there are questions, if you are interested in any of the work that they've done, because it also has any published work and or projects that they are currently working on. The OECS saw that this as a major need, because throughout the region, there are definitely people working in the various sectors, but we didn't ever have a place to put that. And one of the things is always knowing where to go to find the right people to assist you. And of course, within our Caribbean context. So this is the website that you can go to, and you just go in there. And if you're looking for a particular field of expertise, you would be able to just type it in and you would find those experts in there. If you are an expert and you would like to register, that's also a place you can go. And we're really trying to build this database up to better serve our entire region so that anybody looking for people with this expertise can easily find it. And these are some of the solutions that we found within the region that are needed. A place where you can have all of these experts in one place, and that people can then reach out based on their particular needs for any climate change work that's being done. So the second initiative that the OECS is currently undertaking as it relates to knowledge gaps is under something called the Ndcfi. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of what the Ndcfi is. It is defined as a regional cross-sector and multi-party stakeholder consultation and engagement process to support ambitions for climate leadership within the Caribbean. NDCs are the pledge that countries make towards achieving their climate change ambition. And so the Ndcfi stands for NDC Finance Initiative. We know one of the major barriers for us within this region is financing. And so this of people for learning and support in project preparation and access to finance in order to accelerate NDC implementation and any other complementary actions that may exist. And so this year we are currently working on, in fact, we're in the final stages of launching the Ndcfi knowledge platform. And once effectively implemented on this website, we would have all the knowledge projects related to NDCs and climate change within our region. But this is going to be a little bit different in that it also has an interactive platform with forums where practitioners in the region can get advice, but they can also learn from previous experience. So you can reach out to the various people who are within the Ndcfi, whether it be donor partners, it could be implementing partners, or it could be practitioners within the region itself. So there will be open forum discussions on various topics. And you can always generate your own topic if you do want assistance, help, or you want to collaborate. And that's something that we really hope can happen. We really want our member states to be able to collaborate on upcoming opportunities. We know that within this region, doing regional projects does have quite a bit of benefit when it comes to administration. You cut administrative costs if you have one central entity administrating the project that can be implemented in several different countries. And also we want to promote the use of digital spaces as a means of regional integration on all things climate change. Because we do know that we are all, we're all in this together. We are trying our best. And when one country gets hit by a storm, we all feel it, it reverberates throughout the region. And so having this one location where we can discuss, but also share information, have the knowledge products right there and easily accessible to all the people in the region is something that we're striving for. We're hoping to be able to launch this particular platform early in March 2021. And my last grouping would be the international response to knowledge gaps. And first of all, I want to say that there are several of these knowledge platforms throughout. The World Bank has, UNEP has, but I'm going to focus on the UNFCCC's response to this. Earlier on, like I said, this is the international legal instrument used to deal with climate change. And they have developed a specific portal for climate change learning. Now, like I said in the beginning, we all experience climate change differently, and we all know different parts of it. So the UNFCCC has really put together this one place where it captures a lot of the experiences throughout the world, and they've put it into a form of courses. So the website hosts more than 50 online courses that can be completed anywhere from 1 to 12 hours. At your own pace. It has a wide variety of topics, from green economy to carbon taxation to ecosystem-based adaptation, and to climate change in things like agriculture, tourism, health. At the end of doing your course, you will receive a digital certificate. And there's also an area where you can put testimonials as to where previous users can actually discuss what they liked about the course, didn't like, and actually make recommendations. Over time, they have vowed to take this into consideration and actually work on some of the courses. And this website overall provides a place where we can learn about some of the common knowledge on climate change. So there's very basic courses for someone who doesn't know much about the topic, all the way up to things like, in front of us, we have fiscal policies. We can talk about public finance and how you build mainstream climate change into that. So lots and lots of courses at all different levels. And I think that that's very important as you have young people joining the workforce who may be put in positions where they don't know much about this topic and they may want to learn more, or people who have had bad experiences with certain climate impacts who may want to just learn about things you can do to build your resilience, etc. Okay, so in wrapping up, I did make recommendations across the three scales, so national, regional, international platforms. So in St. Lucia, while the NEIS is groundbreaking in our region for sure, and having something like that is something that is actually being, it's being sought after by other islands. I know both Antigua and St. Vincent are interested in creating something like that. It is something there does need to be a bit of tweaking in order to allow all data to be uploaded without having to change the current format of the data. So that is currently a slight barrier. It's not major, but it's something that can be changed. And also to have a mechanism for people to speak to the webmaster and possibly to each other while using the platform. Within the OECS, we do need a sustainable plan for the expansion of the databases. And of course, public awareness is something that's also important, because having the platforms are great, but if people don't know that they're there, that poses an issue. On the international front, one thing I do think that UNFCCC needs to do is really create a space for networking. So we have lots and lots of expert databases within the UNFCCC, but there isn't really a place where you can easily be introduced to those people, introduce yourself, in order to, again, work together on solving something that no one country can really solve. And a space for regions to also meet with each other, or like regions. So for example, there are several island regions throughout the world. We need a space for them, for us as island practitioners, to come together and really be able to communicate with each other and also learn from each other's experiences, whether good or bad. And I think that is it for me. So thank you so much for your attention, and I'll take any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Shanna, for your presentation. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you very much. And we will, of course, ask people to stand by to make their comments or ask their questions, to remind the participants of, and some of the presenters, that the GEF intends to publish the in a form that is publishable. Additionally, there is an ongoing evaluation of the presentations and the conference, and we just want to remind you to go to the link that was sent on comments. I think we have, yes, opening batsman.
Roy Fredericks. As you see, your new ecosystem, right?
Indeed.
Everybody seems to be adapting ecological terms now, you know. And I wonder sometimes if they know what it means. But will tell us about that as a communications expert. Shanna, well done. I am wondering though, Shanna, there's data, there's the analysis of the data, there's a synthesis of the data to bring us new knowledge, new understandings, new perspectives. How do we synthesize new perspectives or new knowledge from this national environmental information system in a really synoptic way for our decision makers to take action? Because I've seen so much data in my life telling ourselves how bad we're doing, because every time the data comes out, we reprint the information, we see a decline in performance. So my question is, the data, if well stored and well accessed, is fantastic. We are improving the knowledge management and the kind. But if we can use it effectively to communicate with our decision makers and our policy makers, that makes the data almost useless. In a sense, it doesn't drive decision making. And maybe our emphasis, we have to use a more integrated approach. I'm throwing that out there to the audience to discuss it because there are various entry points for such a discussion. Over to you, Shanna.
Absolutely, Giles. So thanks for that question. And it really is about integration. Climate change is not supposed to be an office, one place. You can have one coordinating mechanism, but you do need to expand outside of that. And I think what we are slowly, and probably not fast, maybe too slowly, learning is that we need to show, when we speak to decision makers, we listen to them all the time. We need to speak their language. We have to communicate to everyone in the language they will understand. Now that's just basic communication skills. I think the problem is that people like me, who is a scientist, that's my background, I will speak to you in science because that's what I know. It is to start engaging the communication experts, the marketing experts, and I'm saying marketing now because I think for a long time we just thought of communications experts, but we want the public relations people, the people who take the bad and spin it into a good and into a good message, and we carry that on. Now that's a very particular skill, and I think the people with those skills aren't really attracted to our particular field, but we have to get them there because they too are being impacted. Last year, when several countries in the world were on fire, I am positive there were public relations people whose houses burned or who were impacted negatively by that. And so at this point, I think it's really the engagement of that. I think within this region, we haven't embraced it quite as we should, but we've seen North America where you have Leonardo DiCaprio, for example, and Zac Efron really coming out and speaking about this. And that's who people listen to. And they're able to break it down into simple ways that us as scientists kind of have to, we say, oh, okay, well, if that's what people will listen to, then let's listen to that. So I think it's engaging at that level. Let's look for marketing specialists and hire them to communicate these messages to our we need it. So I think that's something that we really need to look into in this region. It may cost us a bit, but I think not acting will cost us more in the long run. So really tailoring our message and looking for that expertise, I think is going to help with bringing on board decision makers. That and the actual storms that unfortunately are coming.
Thank you for your response, Shanna. I wanted to just not to respond to the current discussion, but to go back to the presentation itself. And you did mention the toolkits that you have prepared, being the level of uptake and use of that toolkit.
So it was only completed, I think, in October. So we can't say for sure what the use of it is right now. We're still waiting for our 6-month numbers. But overall, there's been quite a bit of training done. There's been quite a bit of engagement done. And it's something that right now, especially EBA, is really being looked for. Those are the kind of projects that the big funders are looking for. And you must have gender equity within there, you must have social inclusion within there. So we actually think this is one of the more needed perspectives. I know my St. Lucian colleagues, we've had an experience of a funder just being very, very specific about having this gender inclusion. You have to have the points on it, the data on it, the information to get this program. So it's something that we think will actually have quite a bit of engagement. And we're working with the region to increase the capacity overall on that and the use of it as well.
Okay, we have a question from Cuthbert Nathaniel. And he said, you mentioned various courses. Can you provide greater information as how to access such courses? And is there a cost?
Actual webpage for you.
Right.
So the ones I mentioned, which are on UNCC Learn, UNCCE Learn, sorry, one word, .org. There is no cost to them. You complete them and then you get your certificate of completion at the end of that. So those are completely free. You get everything you need right there for that particular website. So no cost to that.
Okay, thanks.
And data sharing platforms, for instance, like the NIS, what mechanism is in place to verify credibility of data, that the data is credible, what is being shared on those platforms?
So with the NEIS, it's only particular people who can upload the data. So it's the practitioners and the experts within the various ministries and agencies that are able to upload the data. Anybody, any student, anybody needing the actual data can go onto the site and download it, but they can't upload that data. So that data is completely checked and verified by the various agencies. That's for the St. Lucia, the National Environmental Information System. So that the process by which you are able to use the system is you are either a data uploader, curator, or a user. So if you're a user, you're a student in secondary school or at tertiary level education and you want information or data, you can get the raw data actually on GHG emissions by the energy sector. You could go on there, access it, download it. And what you do with it is another question, but the actual data can only be uploaded. So that data can only be uploaded by sustainable development, who is the person who collects the data and curates it.
Okay. Thank you. I have a question, a follow-up question. Well, to that question just posed. In terms of strategy by the OECS, what many other platforms which address the same subject matter?
Thanks for that. So with the two ones that I presented on, which is the expert database, and of course the knowledge products that are affiliated with that, and the Ndcfi knowledge platform. With the expert database, it was actually just, it was born out of coming up with a way in which the region can respond to the needs. It was found by the actual consultants that there were so many people who knew so much about climate change in this region, and yet there was nowhere where you could find one place to find them. So you may see Dawn Pierre Nathaniel on a paper somewhere, and on that, at that time, she worked in departments of fisheries. So she has a fisheries expertise, but now she's at sustainable development and another portfolio. But there's no way to know that unless you know her. So the reason for that is to really pool all our experts into one location so that people looking for experts can find them easily, but also so that experts can find each other easily. So that was for the expert database. The Ndcfi platform really came out of a need to have a place, a virtual place, especially in the last year, where we've been trying to have our Ndcfi forum for over a year now and have been unable to have an in-person meeting. So we thought, let's build a online place where engagement can continue, where people can have questions and have them answered by their colleagues within the region, where we can have open discussions on issues that we might be facing, or if a funding opportunity comes up, we can share it and countries can decide to collaborate. There is no virtual space right now where that can happen. So both of these were really built out of gaps that we had identified within our region. for places for people to go and easily access information and data that they needed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Someone hand is up. Oh, I thought I heard a murmur. A follow-up, another question from me is, I think based on what I think to empower people who have to get policymakers to implement and develop policy.
Point of the Adaptation project was really to empower citizens at where they are to share their information, share their knowledge. Some of the toolkits, it was really built from local knowledge and local examples of ecosystem-based adaptation that's happening that they may not even know that that's what it's called. You know, that might not be the term we use when we go in and do serious mangrove reforestation, when we go in and do serious rainforest reforestation, where we are looking at coral reefs and how to make them more resilient. All of those are examples of ecosystem-based adaptation at the local level, and it was happening throughout the region. And that's where several of our state case studies will focus on really getting communities, and we work with communities and we build from there. That's part of our role in our unit, is really to engage communities in building their resilience. And the hope is that that will then build up into communities, building up into actual countries, and then a region that is empowered to do what needs to be done.
Yes, Mr. Romulus.
Thank you, Mr. Charles. One of the problems in the Caribbean is access to sensitive information and information that could be very useful in policy development and strategizing. Is the OCS doing anything on the access to information rights of the public or of persons to access the information for decision making? I also want to draw attention to a point made by Professor Adri in the People's Parliament in November, where she's head of services, South Institute for Social and Economic Research at Mona, that in the Caribbean, politicians are notorious for making decisions without data and for being so impatient that they approve a study before the study vision. And isn't there information that that might come to you that might be classified not for the public? Particularly, I can think of in recent times, the last 2 years, the issue of pollution in certain Eastern Caribbean islands.
Water quality?
Of the archipelago. Yes, and you can't say anything because every country believes that it's going to tarnish their reputation. So you cannot use the shame rod to persuade change or to persuade, and therefore you are muffled. And therefore we continue to tell ourselves we are doing studies, but the studies telling us, we're doing bad and bad and bad and worse and worse and worse and worse. I am going to suggest a new theology for sustainable development. When we talk about value systems that drive us, because I really believe I'm reaching the point where I don't think science is going to make us, is going to change our hats and change the attitudes we have towards the environment, because this action is being taken. Look at what is happening in the US. Supposing the first world country with the most Nobel Prize winners in science and physics and so on, and yet a nation, making decisions like that. So the question is, have we thrown rational thought out of the door, Mr. Charles? So the issue of access, I don't know if you can touch on that, Shana, and maybe Ambert as a communications expert can touch on that as well. Thank you.
No problem. So as it relates to access to information, that's a various member states issue. So within the member states, while we are encouraging them, for example, to sign on to the Escazú agreement, that's what we can do, is encourage. But again, I think it goes back to Mr. Charles's question before about engagement of communities. We, the people, have the power. As we build on that, as we create citizen scientists, Whereas I agree with you that science is losing its ability to stand, I think citizen science, where people find the problem and find the solution within themselves, they see things different and they can possibly make that noise that's needed in order to get the right attention. You can see a problem and you can find solutions innovative within your community, and hopefully those are ecosystem based, because nature is for within the OECS.
Thank you. And since I was cajoled, I will.
Democracy, sorry.
I think just to use Jeff terminology, I will with you sometime. That perhaps we need to look at an SDG number 18, which is communication. You know, a number of the institutions which had presented platforms for public discussion are no longer there. We should make every effort. You know, there are pros and cons of unbridled use of social media platforms. But if we're able to convert these into committees for people to access information, and again, there's also sort of the back engine of making the information to go in depth here, but just to put it on the table, maybe going forward as you propose, in her work at the OECS, having myself been there through the natural resource management units many years ago and trying at the policymakers or at the people. This is a perpetual dilemma, usually undervalued, usually second thoughts. Besides, we spend so much time and resources on the production of messages and so forth. The budget is finished. You don't have enough money to distribute the message. You get a few slots on radio here and there, and then after that, front in terms of trying to address the deficiencies of knowledge management. Till discussion for a different time. And I'm sure Jeff can.
Since you're the chair of the board, will facilitate your passage of such a proposal when it comes to our desk. Just one point though, I've always been concerned about the difference between correlation and causation. Let me give you a wonderful example. In a certain community in Lucia, there was a rise in enteric disease and gastrointestinal problems. And the science center, the hospital, you know what, the doctor writes gastrointestinal, but he doesn't say where it comes from. Now, you know, gastrointestinal can be caused by the food you ate last night that was in the refrigerator for 3 days, or the roti that wasn't well cooked or well warmed because diseases have entered it and bacteria have entered it. We are not, the information is there. It seems to me that unless we begin to reconnect it with the water quality that the children and the people who are bathing in, until something becomes a national issue, maybe the way we present, we need to find, we need to do studies that prove causation. We know the cancers are more complex. We accept to establish the causation. And Dr. Gabriel was saying the same thing in the People's Parliament is documented. So maybe the presentation of the data too. I don't know. I pause.
Again, I will leave with questions to ponder on, and I hope, you know, going forward, invite our next presenter, the forestry, Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Forestry Division's research on the Lansan tree in St. Lucia, that layer of bioinformation. Nicole just wants us to know that she's the education officer who will assess. Okay, over to you.
Information on behalf of the Forestry Department. We will begin by just viewing a short film or video. So I'm going to share now. Everyone can see?
Yes.
Yes. Packet of incense from St. Lucia. But this time I want to tell you what I found out when I went to buy it from a dying out. It was a shock, I can tell you. I don't want to be responsible for destroying our forest. She introduced me to Monty, who works for the forestry department. He told me they want to protect the tree, but they don't want to stop people from getting insects. He offered to show me how we can all get what we need. The incense comes from the lesser tree, and Lucia is one of the few places where these trees can still be found. When the tappers cut away too much bark to get the resin that the incense is made from, the trees get infected and turn rotten. This tree probably dies. They've developed a new technique that doesn't harm the tree and is even more effective at getting the resin. They're now training tappers and giving them their own plots and a special license to do it. The lesser is a very special tree. As well as making incense, birds and other wildlife eat the fruits. It's a part of all the different species that make up the forest. Monty invited me to bring my children to enjoy this place, and you must come too when you next visit. We've been missing out on one of the most amazing places on earth. So now you know. Please tell anyone else you know who uses this incense. It also helps to keep the mosquitoes away. Well, this is my presentation in a nutshell. I hope that everyone enjoyed viewing this video. So I will expand a little further. Yes, so we're looking at sustainable harvesting of the lesser resin in St. Lucia, and we work with various partners to get this accomplished. We recognize that there existed a problem, and the main problem is that there's overexploitation and there's a great decline of the species. And we found that there are very few remaining populations of lesser in Guadeloupe and Martinique. And surveys that were done in 2014, 2015 found that there were no populations in St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Okay, and that according to IUCN Red List, it is categorized as being an endangered species. And we have even high mortality right here in St. Lucia because of opportunistic tappers. This is just a photo showing one of the ways the opportunistic tappers harvest. They would slash the tree indiscriminately, and what you'd find happening is that you'd find the tree eventually rotting, snapping, and dying.
You want to switch to the photo? Still have the video.
The video is still there?
Yes.
Okay, let me. Because I minimized it just now. I'll close it.
We have someone on the Zoom who we have some echo from there. Whoever has the mic open.
Okay.
Okay, there you are.
We could see the presentation now?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So sustainable harvest of the Lucia or the incense in St. Lucia. Like I said, the major problem that was identified is that you have a sharp decline of the population because of overexploitation. Also, we found that there are very few plants or population in Guadeloupe and Martinique, and that recent studies that were done in 2014, 2015 found that they have none left, none of the species left in St. Kitts and Nevis and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Also, we found that even right here in St. Lucia, which has the largest stand of the Lucia population, that they have high mortality rates. And according to, like I said, IUCN, it is considered an endangered species. You could see the photo now? Yes, this is just a photo showing.
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Showing the results of what happens when people indiscriminately harvest the Lucia. So we have a lot of opportunistic tappers. They would come and they would slash the tree indiscriminately, not using any particular technique or methodology. And what we found would happen is that you'd have a lot of the trees dying. Well, yes, the Lucia is a flowering plant, and it's endemic to the Eastern Caribbean. And it's the third commonest species that is found in our forest. So we have a pretty healthy population for now in St. Lucia. The ecological range is Dominica, Guadeloupe, Jamaica, Martinique, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent, and St. Lucia. But what we have found is that in a recent survey, they have no population left in St. Kitts and Nevis, none in St. Vincent and Grenadines, and in the other islands, the population is very small. And Dominica is yet to be reevaluated post Hurricane Maria in 2017. And we know great damage was done to their forest in Dominica because of that hurricane. So then again, another threat to the population of the Lucia. This map shows the two of the sites that were used to carry out the experiments. We had plots in Chasse in Babono and on the Bad Lille. And forestry division employees, staff, along with fauna and flora staff, as well as tappers, worked in those areas during that time. Now, some of the actual uses and potential use of the Lucia, medicinal. For instance, a lot of people use the Lucia. They will put it in coconut oil and they would rub themselves with it for joint pain and arthritis. And some people, they would pour hot water on it and they would inhale it to help decongest them and to clear up their sinuses. Of course, if we have any persons who are Catholic or anyone who has been to a Catholic church, we know that the incense is widely used in the Catholic church, where they put it and smoke it and to bless the place, etc. Some people in religious rites use it to dispel evil spirits. It is also used as an insect repellent. Locally, some people would burn it, the raw incense in small coal pots and smoke out the place to repel mosquitoes. And a lot of us, when we go to the forest, at least we forestry staff, when we take the skin of the seed itself, when you squeeze it, there would be a nice oil that it exudes, and we'd rub it on ourselves, and even that would help to repel mosquitoes. And that is why we think there's a lot of scope for using the Lucia to create essential oils and to use in aromatherapy, etc. Now, in light of the problem, this sharp decline and even the loss of the species in other Caribbean sister islands, other countries, the solutions we found are the following. So we had the objective to analyze data trends of the quantity of Lucia resin produced per tree per month in the various studies done before 2011, 2012, and 2016, using a standard cut and 5% sulfuric acid. Also, to assess the health and the conditions of the Lucia trees that were harvested in 2016, and to interview and record the Lucia tappers' perceptions of satisfaction and usefulness of the pilot project of 2016 to harvest the Lucia resin in the forest reserve. Now, a lot of what I'll be presenting today will be focused on the 2016 pilot research that was done. But in 2011 to 2013, 2014, thereabout, we carried out a research experiment where different types of cuts were used to see which one exudes good quantity and quality of resin without actually harming the trees or causing their death or destruction. So in 2016, what the forestry department did is that four tappers, and those tappers, in speaking with them, tell us that the lesser they sell at least supplements their income by at least 25 to 30%. And they rely heavily on tapping of the lesser. And a lot of the tappers, the 4 tappers involved, and many of the others we spoke to, a lot of them are from rural areas and they do a little subsistent farming. So it's a really big deal to them having the opportunity to tap into that lesser and make extra income. So each tapper was allowed to tap 60 trees in the Bad Little Forest. So the forestry department, we allotted the plots to them. Each plot had 60 trees, and they were supposed to apply the approved method that we came up with from the previous research experiments. And that is making one small incision in the back of the tree every 2 weeks and spraying a solution of 5% of sulfuric acid. So they would make that small incision, spray a little sulfuric acid, 5% solution. And after 2 weeks, they would come and harvest. And then they would deepen the cut a little or make another slight incision and spray the acid again. And then all that information in terms of the quantity of the resin was collected and weighed by us. Now, we use several indicators to evaluate the health of the tree. But one of the key ones based on literature review and research was the presence of the termite trails. A lot of literature said if they have a lot of termite trails, usually 4 or 5 and more, then most likely that tree is very sick and it will die. So although we looked at several indicators, in this presentation, you'll see relation more with the termite trails present. Also, the lesser tappers, we interviewed them because we wanted to know, get feedback from them. How did they feel about the quantity of resin they received using the approved method, the quality of the resin, etc. So these are some of the variables we use to, or indicators we use to evaluate the health of the trees after they were tapped. Now, these were done before the tree was tapped, during the tapping period, and a year after, 7 months and then a year after. So we looked at tree growth, we look at the crown health, we look at the number of termite tunnels, we look at the number of cankers on the trees, we looked at if there was any presence of fungi. We also looked at if there were any cavities or number of cavities. Now, this just shows the quantity of lesser that was collected per tree per month during the period of May to December 2011, and January to March 2012, and March to August 2016. And what we noticed is that over time, there was linear progression. Over time, we found that more lesser resin was produced, and that the minimum that was collected per tree per month in 2016 was 7.8 grams. That's the minimum. And compared to the maximum that was collected in 2011 when we were just starting off the process. So over time, we saw that there was an increase in the amount of resin or the amount of lesser that was collected. As was said, results show tappers can obtain more resin and maintain healthy population by tapping mature trees at breast height. Now, breast height is usually 1.3 meters from the base of the tree, of the tree trunk, of the stem, to as high as 2 meters in some cases, so not higher than 2 meters. So at breast height, they could tap into those trees. And we found that trees with diameters of 20 centimeters and more, they exuded a good quality and quantity of resin, and the health of the tree remained intact. So we encourage the tappers to tap into mature trees with at least diameters of 20 centimeters and more. And of course, apply the 5% solution of sulfuric acid. So that was found to be the best method, which maintained the health of the tree and also gave quality resin, or lesser in terms of quantity and quality. This is just a graph showing the four plots using the 4 different tappers, what was obtained. Yeah, as was previously said, each tapper had 60 trees and there were 4 tappers, so 40 trees in all were tapped. And then we saw that there was a linear increase in the quantity of Lucia harvested during that time. And we had a maximum yield of 2,500 grams and a minimum yield of 150 grams. The average mean yield was 796 grams per plot in the experiment. Here we found that in 2011, when the research started, the average number of termite trails was about 1. And even after tapping using the approved method in 2016, we found that there was no change. So that was also an indication that damage to the tree was minimal. In the Shasa area, there were not any tap trees for the 2016 pilot project. That pilot project happened on the Badlil only. As this says, 2 tappers were interviewed. In terms of those who participated, and also other tappers. There we have 2, but we also had conversation with other tappers, asking them what did they think about use of the method, the amount and the quantity and quality of the Lucia produced. And the feedback we got was very positive. And they agreed that it is something they would like to continue because they want sustainability. They want to be able to keep coming back and knowing they have a source of income, because a lot of them, they're really struggling. Like I said, a lot of them were just subsistent farmers. So the income that they would generate from the Lucia really helped their situation and improved their lives. Also, a blind survey found that the consumers could not distinguish between the incense produced with or without the stimulant. And the stimulant that we're talking about is the 5% solution sulfuric acid. Now, one of the things we did to test that during that consumer survey is that we brought incense, both those that were tapped without the sulfuric acid and those tapped with the sulfuric acid. We brought it to 7 parishes around St. Lucia: Barbono, Ancillary and Canaries, Soufre, and they were given to the priests to use during their religious ceremonies. And they were asked to monitor the color of the smoke, the scent, how quickly it burns. And honestly, none of them could tell the difference, none. So it shows that the method that we're encouraging the tappers to use actually indeed works and doesn't affect how the Lucia burns, the scent of the Lucia, etc. Now, these are just some information we got from the tappers themselves, those who volunteered to speak with us, and also when we spoke to vendors in the market. They would send about a pound of Lucia, about $25 to the local vendors. And I'm sure all of you at one point or the other have been to the market. You will see the vendors selling the small little portions, maybe just a 30, 40 grams in a small white bag, and they'd sell it for $5 per person. But some of the tappers said if they have 2 pounds of Lucia, depending on which part of Martinique, they could get 40 euros for the 2 pounds, and sometimes as much as 100 euros. Depends on who the buyer is in Martinique and what part of Martinique. So that is very encouraging. In conclusion, in 2011 and 2013, the St. Lucia Forestry Division and Fauna and Flora International determined that the method of 1 cut of the bark at the diameter height, at the diameter breast height, and application of a 5% solution sulfuric acid was the best harvesting strategy to extract the Lucia. so that it's sustainable and that would not cause harm to the trees. Also, this was tested in 2016, and we found that the production of the Lucia, the yields even increased in 2016 compared to when the trials and the first experiments were done during 2011 and 2013, and that the trees remained healthy. So we have deduced that the methodology can be adopted and it can be replicated throughout St. Lucia and other Caribbean islands who still have the Lucia tree and who are willing to, well, where people do extraction so they can do it in a sustainable way. What currently exists? We have a draft management plan from 2018. There's a proven and effective tapping methodology which maintains the health of the plants, so we know that. And it is a livelihood activity with great potential to grow because we could do value added and really increase the level of income that these tappers can get. What's needed? We need to implement the Lucia management plan. We need certification and licensing of tappers and buyers. We need more market research, especially to enhance the added value that can be gotten from the Lucia resin and derivatives, because Lucia is a non-timber forest product, and in other parts of the world, exudes and resins make millions of dollars. They use it in varnishes, in paints, in pharmaceuticals. So there is potential. We need further research on the Lucia plants to correlate between the health and the resin production. Because during these studies, we did not focus a lot on, for instance, the climatic condition. In speaking to some of the tappers, some did say, for instance, if some of the Lucia trees were closer to river courses, they would probably get a higher exude, but a thinner exude. But in the implementation, in the management plan, things like that are stipulated. How far from a water source should you tap? For instance, we say there should be a buffer, locations of trees that should and shouldn't be tapped, the diameter size that are apt for tapping. So the management plan, we need to implement it and to give certification and licensing. Further training of the technique, we need to promote that, and to help empower private landowners, because there are private landowners who have Lucia stands on their land. So for them to consider it as a viable option and include it in their business portfolio. Because a lot of people, private owners who have forests, honestly, in the work we do as forestry, when you speak to a lot of them, they think about cutting it down, using it for development. But we need to push green economy activities. We need to show them that they have a wealth on their land that can be used to generate income without destroying the environment, which will make us more resilient to climate change, and which will provide bread on the table for our people, money in their pockets, because we need money to do everything. What is also needed, enforcement and penalties for illegal access and breach of contract. Because even a lot of the stands of Lucia is found in the forest reserve, owned by the government, owned by us, the people. And we still have issues where some people enter illegally, because for you to enter the forest reserve, you must have permission from the forestry department. And some people enter illegally to do tapping. So we have to do a lot of monitoring. So we need some kind of enforcement and penalties. And a lot of that feedback we receive from the tappers themselves, because sometimes they would have conflict. Some tappers would go in, they would harvest in what is considered a sustainable manner, and other opportunistic tappers would come in and they would take the Lucia that they from the trees they already tapped, or indiscriminately tap and cause destruction to the very trees that they're depending on for supplementary income. So we need enforcement, and we need to have penalties for illegal access and breach. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you very much. And any questions. My colleague Donatien Gustav is also there to assist with any questions you may have concerning this presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole.
My pleasure.
Very detailed and very informative presentation. Very good. I think that for those of us who may be unfamiliar, I do forest work, so I'm familiar with some of the territories you mentioned.
Okay.
But I would just invite our followers to field their questions. But a very obvious question I've asked before, the response is, first of all, I assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the demand is coming from Martinique, a high demand is coming from Martinique. Is that correct?
Yes, a high demand. A high demand, I'm getting some feedback. A high demand is coming from Martinique, and also the fact that we have a local-based market with the Catholic churches who use the incense.
So if there is a demand, why hasn't there been any propagation and planting of nursery trees in Martinique to supply themselves?
That is a very good question, and in all honesty, I do not know. I don't know if my colleague Donatien can shed any further light on this.
Donatien, can you?
Well, good morning, everyone. I think the major challenge is not being able to control the demand in Martinique. Remember,
Donatien, just hold on a minute. Admin, we're getting your feedback. You can go ahead.
You hearing me?
Yes, go ahead now.
Yeah, I was saying the major challenge is there has always been a demand for Lucin in these territories, the French territories, the Guadeloupe, Martinique. And it is because of that demand, there was the demise of Lucin there. Fortunately, by divine intervention, by the work of persons like Gabriel Coco Charles, it didn't happen in St. Lucia. So we're fortunate that it's happening here. And I want to add very quickly that we have been successful in propagating and enriching forests with Lucin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have a question from Don Pierre Nathaniel, and she said, very interesting presentation. Noting possible sale of $25 per pound locally and 40 euros per 2 pounds in Martinique. Can you comment on the current legal economic gains, livelihoods from sustainable harvesting? How are tappers gaining access to sulfuric acid for the technique? Has the department considered co-management as a way to encourage sustainable harvesting, noting that the trees are largely found, are largely found in reserves? Any of you?
Okay, well,
you got the question?
I got part of it for sure. I can comment. Have we as the department considered co-management?
Yeah.
We have, like was said, and like you said, Dawn, a lot of the large population of the Lucia is found in the forest reserve, which we help manage, the forestry division. So we have considered, and in the management plan that we have, this is what it encourages, co-management, because we would have to monitor them. We actually take in record of what is harvested. We monitor what they do. We monitor the plants as well. And as for how they obtain the sulfuric acid, we obtain sulfuric acid through Fauna Flora International. And currently we are the ones providing the tappers who have permission to enter with the sulfuric acid. But for instance, in the previous research, they used higher concentrations of sulfuric acid, but it was found that it might be something that might be too dangerous for the tappers, for the users. So then the 5% concentration was seen to be at. And in the management plan, it is itinerated that, for instance, access could be obtained where we have an agreement with certain pharmacies and Renwick so that they can access the sulfuric acid. But for now, we don't want forestry department giving the sulfuric acid to the tappers who have permission to access the forest reserve to do their tapping. So when they're about to tap, they call us, we go in with them. Also, the resin they collected, they bring it to the office, which is right near to the tapping area. We take the weight and we fill out a form, so we have that data there, and we feed that data into our local forest management information system in the department.
May I add something?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, well, three aspects. One of the key actions on the way forward is to do a marketing study. Two, we deliberately did a trial with community personnel to work out a strategy to see how we can operationalize working with communities, and it was successful. Finally, all of this is geared towards one, co-management with communities, but also to promote private forestry with Lucia. Persons who have the private holdings, they can be familiar with a procedure where they can diversify income, ecotourism, agroforestry, but with Lucia. Thank you.
Very much. Yeah, thank you. I have a question from Ndcfi. He said, can other parts of the plant be used to extract the oil, leaves, etc.?
Could you repeat the question, please?
Can other parts of the plant be used to extract the oil, the leaves, etc.?
Well, when you cut into the tree bark, you get the resin, but you'd get, for instance, the oils, you would get it from the skin of the fruit. So that's where the skin of the fruit would exude a lot of the oil, which we believe can be an essential oil, and there's potential for that development.
Okay, another question comes from...
Good day.
Yes.
Yes, Carl Augustine from the Forestry Division.
Oh, yes.
Forestry Division.
Go ahead.
Just to interject, there is already some work being done with a small entity who actually do essential oils for perfumery and so on, where some of the leaves, the foliage of the Lhasa was used for the extraction of oil. Right? So that is something that is actually already happening. And what the plan is to actually look at developing a different set of management protocol for the trees, right? To favor that type of sustainable use. So we will look at an approach similar to the ones taken with species like the bee.
Okay.
Comment? Can I give some feedback as well?
Yes, go ahead, Ndcfi, go ahead.
We really don't know which part of the plant has the highest concentration of essential oils or active ingredients. This is why we are actively seeking characterization of the tree, from the leaves, the roots, the bark, the fruits, to know what is present, the proportions in the different parts of the plant. For Lucia. Thank you.
Okay. Nicole, I have two questions. One, it says, what qualifies?
Well, one of the things, at least with the train tappers, we have an arrangement with them where they inform us before they come. We've given them permission to have access to the forest, and then we go in and we monitor. Also, part of our patrol and surveillance and monitoring work, involves monitoring the activities which takes place in the forest reserve. But one or two do slip through the cracks and do enter some of the forest reserve. We're finding, especially in Chasse area, that we do have some illegal tappers who sometimes get in and harvest the lesser, not in the sustainable manner where the trained tappers were taught. So we still have some work to do, but we do monitoring and we do surveillance of especially the areas we know they normally access to minimize on overexploitation.
Yeah, I guess the question was, I guess follow through is the extent to which you could assess the yield of a particular plant, so you are not over harvesting.
Can I also interject again?
Go ahead.
Two things, yes. But we do recognize, just to continue build on what Nicole just said, that this is why it is critical to continue or to have a robust program for training more within our society, within our communities, right? And to also even target those who privately own LASA, right? So that to ensure that the new approach, both for tapping and tree management, reaches a certain critical mass within the St. Lucian society. Right? So this is one of the things that we want to ensure that we piggyback on.
Okay, dear question.
The next thing is in terms of the issue of over harvested in the method that we do. There is part of the recommendations moving forward is to only tap for a certain number of years continuously, and then to have a fallow, a period where the trees are left for a couple of years to regenerate, rejuvenate themselves. But there's where now the continuous monitoring is essential, so that you could be applying the assessment used for gauging the health of the other tree, and then now probably make your management decision based on these.
Thanks. There are two questions from Cuthbert Nathaniel. I think Nicole may have addressed the first one, which is, has the department given due consideration for replanting to ensure sustainability? I think you spoke of some other areas that you're attempting to get some of these. You can also sort of repeat it. But his follow-up question is, what qualifies a tapper to extract the resin and not another? I guess what are the qualification criteria for being a tapper?
Okay, well, when we started this research, persons were already involved in doing tapping. So one of the main objectives we had was to train them, and then to further license them and to certify them. So what qualifies someone to be a tapper? Well, we want sustainable tappers, so we training, but they already have tappers out there. Unfortunately, too many of them are opportunistic tappers. So as been said, we want to, part of our management strategy is to, because we've identified quite a few of them, is to do further training and continuous training, and to certify them and to license them so that they could be sustainable tappers. Also, we have identified they have private lands, on private lands, and actually regeneration of lesser when the trees are not harmed is fairly high. But when you have destruction of the trees, and another thing we learned through the study is that when the trees are damaged and they're infested with disease, it could actually spread to trees that have not been tapped and further cause decline in the population. So what qualifies a tapper? That they train, that they do sustainable harvesting using the method that we have taught, and that they're certified and licensed.
Thanks. One more question from Lintus. Can we use citric acid, which he says is more environmentally friendly, and that it is only that sulfuric acid will yield, is it that only sulfuric acid will yield the results? Sulfuric acid is a potential contaminant to the flora and fauna in the vicinity. Can you comment on this?
Okay, well, based on previous research that was done by Fauna Flora International, and in other countries where resins are tapped, they found that sulfuric acid actually was not harmful to the environment or to the plant at the concentration which we are using, the 5%. And in some previous studies, I cannot recall clearly if it was citric acids, but some other acids were tried, and it was found that sulfuric acid was the one that yielded best results with regards to resins and exudes. That is why sulfuric acid was used in the first place, based on experience from other countries who extract resins and used in industry. So we, at this point, I'm not clear whether citric acid can be used, but it was found that sulfuric acid at a 5% concentration is not deleterious, is not damaging. The most is if someone gets it in the eye, it cause irritation of the eye and they need to wash it out of the skin. But at the 5%, it does not harm the plant, it does not harm the environment. And that the resin quantity is quite high using that method and using that concentration of acid.
Okay, thank you very much, Nicole, and your team for this very interesting presentation and follow-up discussion. We're just about to close your session before we move to the next session. Do you have any closing comments, any final 2 cents to add?
Well, I'd like to thank, well, not myself, but myself and the Forestry Division would like to thank everyone for the opportunity. And we would like to encourage persons to push green economy. We know our natural resources like our forests, they play such vital roles in enriching our lives by providing ecological services, provisional services. And in light of climate change, the importance of the forests cannot be understated. So it's very important that we have a healthy forest. And if we can sustainably manage it and provide livelihoods for our people, it is something that we should encourage and we should do, and we should collaborate to see that it's done. So thank you again on behalf of the Forestry Division for the opportunity.
Thank you very much on behalf of the participants and all those who have been following and the organizers. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to recognize the donors, FFI, Fauna and Flora International, and all of the persons highlighted in the very first presentation. I think it's Sandals, it's DEFRA, all of them, without whom we would not have been able to facilitate this process. So the government of St. Lucia, and to all, thank you so much for facilitating this process, the research, empowerment of people. That's what we're all about at Forestry Division. Thank you.
Thank you. Your partners are duly recognized. And as we prepare for our next session, we will just go to a short video just to give you some time to drink some water, and we'll just invite our next presenter, Berthia Thomas, to stand by. So we'll now go over to our technical team to present the video. Enjoy the watching.
Imagine the world without a Caribbean. Imagine a future with pinnacled remnants of these islands, like sculptures floating on a sea of debris. In the second decade of the 21st century, the Caribbean is once more in a fight for its continued existence, having battled forces of imperialism for centuries. The region must now confront the devastating impacts of global warming and climate change. Viewed largely as a region of high middle-income countries, the Caribbean has limited access to external funding. Pockets of poverty persist and are as deep as income disparities are wide. Make no distinction between richer and poorer countries. While visitors to our islands may seem are crippling livelihoods, for us, the effects of climate change on the University of the West Indies, political and professional leaders, and has guided the rich. We stand at the forefront of the science on environmental resource management, climate modeling, natural disasters, top 4% of over 28,000 universities in the world, serving 50,000 students across 17 Caribbean countries with a sustainable planet through our teaching, research, advocacy, and partnerships. Recognized for our climate-related initiatives, the UWI was selected by the International Association of Universities to lead a global university consortium on SDG 13. Our Global Institute for Climate Smart and Resilient Development, connecting sustainable projects to funding and to the expertise of researchers and innovators. As a public, comprehensive institution, the UWI has never been daunted by limited means, nor by our vast responsibility to the region. Our allegiance is to continue as a developmental force to nurture the human and social capital. Our young people are environmentally conscious and boldly persistent in holding decision makers accountable. Together, we can make the Caribbean the first climate. For us, tackling climate change is not only a priority, it is a matter of our survival.
Thank you very much. And we welcome you back to our presentations. We're now on the second part of day 2. And this morning we heard from Shelian Cox of UWI, Shana Emmanuel of the OECS, and just a while ago, Nicole LaForce Haynes of the Forestry Department in St. Lucia. Our next presenter is Berthia Thomas, community-based participatory approach to vulnerability analysis with adaptation planning for pelagic sargassum in the Eastern Caribbean. Graduate student at the Center for Resource Management in Environmental Studies, SOMES, at the University of the West Indies, Capel Campus, Barbados, of pelagic sargassum, with special emphasis on evaluating community-level vulnerability in St. Lucia through participatory approaches. This will facilitate the identification and understanding of variations in community vulnerability to pelagic sargassum and guide the adaptive planning process. With a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, emphasis in zoology from the Andrews, where she graduated in 2011 with a Science and Technology Officer within the Department of Sustainability. She has also contributed to the ongoing work on biodiversity, biosafety, coastal lecturer for the University of Southern Caribbean Satellite Campus in Lucia, an assistant examiner for the traveling, shopping, and meeting with all thy might. And her underlying philosophy of life is to be the change you want to see. We hope that through her research, over to you for your presentation.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Charles. Pleasant good morning to everyone.
You.
I'm going to share my screen at this time. Could you just kindly confirm that you are able to see it?
Yes, we are confirming.
All right, so
Proceed.
wonderful. Thank you again, Mr. Charles. A pleasant good morning to everyone. I would like to thank UWI Open Campus, the Department of Sustainable Development, and the Center for Resource Management and Environmental Studies at UWI for the opportunity to present this research. Okay, the topic for my research is a community-based participatory approach to vulnerability analysis and adaptation planning for pelagic sargassum influxes in the Eastern Caribbean, a St. Lucia case study. And I would like to highlight from the onset that this is a modified version of a presentation I delivered at a seminar some time ago on my ongoing PhD work, and it has been adapted for this Open Campus Country Conference and made to focus a bit on climate change, which is what we're dealing with here today. So this is more like an intention to study. For the next few minutes, we will be looking at the following: a background, what is sargassum? Where did it come from? How did it get here? Why is it here? We're going to look at the pros and cons of sargassum and how it is related to climate change. I'm going to share with you the rationale for my study, as well as my research summary, aim and objectives, and I will end with the proposed methodology. Background. In the last decade, the shores of the Caribbean has been inundated with unusual amounts of pelagic sargassum, and that is something that no one can deny. High influxes first began in 2011 and continued in 2014 and 2015, but reached unprecedented amounts in 2018. This record-breaking beaching event of 2018, however, demonstrated what scientists and governments already knew. We had a serious problem with pelagic sargassum, and pelagic sargassum was affecting the Caribbean region at a greater frequency, longer duration, and at a larger quantity. So, when sargassum first appeared, scientists scrambled to understand it. What is it? When did it get here? Why is it here? Where is it here? And how did it get here? So, what is sargassum? Sargassum is a brown marine macroalgae or a seaweed that is naturally found in the warm tropical waters of the Atlantic Ocean. The species associated with the recent inundations are Sargassum Flutens and Sargassum natans. These are two species. And they are very different. They're completely pelagic. They remain on the open ocean. And they're very different from their benthic counterparts, which are bottom-dwelling species. Now, the actual Sargassum plant, the benthic species attached to the ocean floor, but pelagic Sargassum is different in that it never attaches to the ocean floor. It reproduces vegetatively. The actual plant is no more than 80 centimeters. It's a very small plant, but depending on the sea state, sargassum becomes entangled and can form mats that are several meters wide and lines that are several kilometers long. When did sargassum get here? As we highlighted, exactly 10 years ago, first appearing in the Caribbean region in 2011. Why did it get here? Which is one of the things we are going to discuss in some more detail. Sargassum, there are many schools of thought as to why it got here. However, the main school of thought is as a result of climate change, particularly an elevation in sea surface temperature, coupled with an increase in our nutrient load that has been caused by deforestation and industrialization and so forth. Where sargassum is originally found in the Sargasso Sea, hence the name Sargasso Sea. However, today it is found throughout the Caribbean region, Gulf of Mexico, Florida, South America, and even West Africa. How did it get here? Again, the literature abounds with various possible transportation pathways, and they're still deciding, using various ocean current technology, how Sargassum got here. Like anything else, Sargassum has both positive and negative effects. Number one, Sargassum serves as an essential fish habitat. What that means is that these floating ecosystems provide shelter, nursery, spawning and feeding grounds for many species, including invertebrates, turtles, and even fish species, commercially important species like our mahi-mahi. Number two, Sargassum has been shown to cause the nutrient enrichment of coastal vegetation. So as the seaweed decomposes, it supplies nutrients to the generally poor coastal soils that help improve plant growth. Number three, Sargassum contributes to shoreline stabilization or sand dune stabilization. What that means is that Sargassum is able to bind the particles of sand, hereby keeping them together, and reduces beach erosion, which is a prevalent occurrence during tropical storms and hurricanes, which are natural occurrence in the Caribbean region. Alternative uses, very important here. There are many things we can make from Sargassum. Our very own Johannan Dujon has established his company Algas, which provides a plant tonic right here in St. Lucia. Other uses includes pharmaceuticals, so for medicines, nutraceuticals for food. It can be used to produce biofuels. It can also be used to produce bioplastic. And there are many other possibilities, alternative uses of Sargassum. Of course, we will discuss about carbon sequestration in some more detail a bit later. Negative impacts. The most noteworthy is the death of many marine animals, especially our turtles, which are unable to escape the sargassum, the hatchlings, and so they become choked. Additionally, the sargassum covers beaches, and so the regular turtle nesting sites become unavailable. And so there's overcrowding when turtles try to lay. Number two, we have destruction of our natural ecosystems, particularly our seagrass beds and our coral reefs, which become smothered with the sargassum, thus reducing the penetration of light. And so these ecosystems are not able to photosynthesize, and so they die. Of course, no one can deny the impact of the foul-smelling gas. This is actually hydrogen sulfide, which has been shown to have many dangerous health effects at certain quantities and on vulnerable populations such as children, the elderly, and pregnant women. Some of these include nausea, insomnia, eye problems, breathing problems, dizziness, and even rash and air infections. Then we have the transportation of exotic species that ride along the sargassum train as it makes its way to the various countries. And so these species are now introduced in an area where they generally do not have any known predators, and so they can have adverse effects on our environment. Of course, sectoral impacts, very critical to my research, but we will be looking at it a bit later in some more detail. As you heard in the topic, a key component of this research is vulnerability. And so what is vulnerability? There are several definitions. I mean, the literature abounds with different definitions. And of course, the variations arise from the application of the concept across different scholarly communities. Now, what they're saying in essence is that there is no correct definition of vulnerability. Instead, what we have is a definition that depends on the context and what it is being used for. So according to Ndcfi 2015, vulnerability is defined as a very useful concept For what? For understanding, measuring, and evaluating the predisposition of people to an environmental hazard. So it could be climate change, it could be flooding, it could be hurricanes, sea level rise, and in this case, sargassum influxes. Ahmed and Kelman in 2018 took this a step further and saw vulnerability as the characteristics and conditions of a community that make it susceptible to negative effects of a hazard. And then it looks at here the socio-political circumstances that contribute to the creation and perpetuation of these conditions. Then Sandura et al. Again in 2018 saw vulnerability as the ability of a community to cope, recover from, and adapt to external stresses and pressures. Decades before, Kelly and Arga in 2000 had said that vulnerability is the ability to endure, recuperate from, and adapt to external stresses, specifically on one's livelihood or well-being. In other words, it viewed vulnerability as a soldier who's wounded in battle. And because he's already wounded, the chances of him being further wounded are greater. So the literature has shown that vulnerability comprises three components: exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So exposure refers to all your elements at risk, and it includes your socioeconomic, environmental, and your cultural assets. So that's your people, your infrastructure, your buildings, your roads, your natural resources, your ecosystem services, and your livelihoods, anything that can be adversely affected. Sensitivity is the degree to which a person or a system is either positively or negatively affected by a hazard. Now, together, exposure and sensitivity are termed impacts, and they increase one's vulnerability. So the higher your exposure, for example, the more vulnerable you are. Adaptive capacity, on the other hand, is the opposite, and it operates counter to exposure and sensitivity. It is the ability of a system to overcome potential damage, and it can do so in two ways: by taking advantage of the opportunities before the hazard, or dealing with the consequences after the hazard. And so adaptive capacity decreases vulnerability. So for example, you may have someone living very close to the shore, the shoreline, and so the sargassum appears to affect them, so they're very exposed. However, that person may have a job security where they make a good salary, and so they're able to source insurance for their home and their household appliances. Additionally, that person has a certain level of education that allows them to understand better adaptive measures. And so while that person is more exposed, that person's adaptive capacity sort of counterbalances what we have here, and so makes that person less vulnerable. We can compare this to someone who perhaps lives further from the shoreline and so is less exposed, but his present economic context or educational background lowers his adaptive capacity and thus makes him more vulnerable. Moving on, sargassum and climate change. Sargassum blooms have been shown to be the result of elevated sea surface temperature. And this is what we use to explain the blooms, actually. As with any other plant, sargassum is an algae, and so the growth rate of that organism would increase with an increase in temperature. Additionally, from the period 1982 to 2018, the average annual sea surface temperature in the Western tropical Atlantic and by extension the Caribbean increased by 0.75 degrees Celsius. And so all of these small amounts are significant. So now these hydrological parameters and the changing ocean conditions that result from climate change, coupled with nutrient enrichment, have contributed to the growth and consolidation of pelagic sargassum. So for example, Our elevated sea surface temperature causes the melting of ice caps. This causes a decrease in salinity. Salinity directly affects our ocean currents. And so things that were no longer in the Caribbean oceans are now present. Now, again, there are several schools of thought for sargassum distribution, but as you can see from the diagram, there are two areas for consolidation. Two consolidation regions, one off the coast of Africa and one off the coast of South America. And what happens is that it begins to accumulate in the Gulf of Guinea in the spring, and then begins to move along with the South Equatorial Current, and it starts to accumulate or beach along the northeast coast of Brazil. Over time, in the early summer, it begins to make its way up north. And so it ends up via the Guyana Current in the southern Lesser Antilles. And by the winter, the sargassum makes its way further up north, reaching the northern Lesser Antilles by the North Equatorial Current. And so this is why different places will be affected with sargassum at different times. However, forecasting is possible. And so we are now able to predict that you will have sargassum blooms by so and so people can now be better prepared. Sargassum and carbon sequestration, of course. Sargassum, like all other algae, play a critical role in climate change mitigation because it reduces our greenhouse gas, carbon dioxide in this case. And so sargassum has the unique ability during very strong winds and heavy mixing of the ocean waters, it quickly sinks to the ocean floor. And so this makes it a very excellent vehicle for artificial carbon sequestration and thus reducing ocean acidification. Now, this study here was done by Jovia et al. In 2020, and it shows what it does here. It compares the global combined sargassum, which comprises global floating sargassum and global benthic sargassum, and it compares it to 3 other marine ecosystems: mangroves, salt marshes, and seagrass beds. And sargassum has been shown to have a far greater geographic extent and above grass biomass than all these other marine ecosystems, as depicted by the figures below. The key findings from that research are as follows. So they inserted the figures into a boosted regression tree model, and they were able to estimate the biomass of sargassum. And sargassum was shown to function as a significant carbon stock compared to all other marine ecosystems. And of course, that would contribute to climate change mitigation. And so the aim here is to restore or to manage it in such a way so that it can serve the purpose, the true purpose. And so we come to more or less my research and what I would like to do. Rationale for my study. The main methodology employed for this study is the participatory approach. And what exactly is the participatory approach? Termed PVA, Participatory Vulnerability Analysis, it encourages and facilitates the involvement of community members, hoping that community members will understand their own vulnerability and utilize that knowledge to effect change. Additionally, PVA purports that community members are in the best position to identify the complexities of their vulnerability because they are the ones that live with the negative impacts of the hazards daily. Additionally, community members possess the traditional knowledge, and so they can tell you the historical patterns of a natural hazard. It targets the poor and the marginalized groups, which we spoke about earlier, that are usually left out of discussions of that nature. We tend to think it's above them. So let's put a policy in place, and the people do not embrace it. They don't feel empowered, and so they don't move forward. And so it allows community members to present a united front and say, here is what we need, here is what we would like, and so I can now hold you accountable for something. Why St. Lucia? St. Lucia lies at the forefront of receiving Sargassum influxes as the central island on the Lesser Antillean arc of the Caribbean archipelago. It's right there in the middle. It receives lots of influxes. Additionally, something appearing for 10 years is very new in the scientific community. However, a lot of studies have been done on its distribution, its ecology, species associated, the socioeconomic impacts, but there has been no community level assessment of Sargassum vulnerability. And so this is the point of this research. Additionally, St. Lucia is a small island developing state, and so it will allow us to make very useful comparisons throughout the Caribbean region. It will allow the scientific community to better understand the hazards, learn from best practices, and perhaps draw meaningful conclusions. Now, according to Mr. Anthony Fulgens of the Department of Agriculture, there are 11 sites along the east coast of St. Lucia from Grosley to Vieux-Fort that continue to receive regular inundations of sargassum. These are Casaba, Anse-la-Vorté, Esperance, Dennery Bay, Pralet Beach, Pralet Jetty, Escap, Micoud Bay, Lance Captain, Savans Bay, and Sandy Beach. And using a criteria of quantity, duration, urgency, value, and persistence, a matrix was created. And for this research, I will be focusing on 3 communities, the communities of Dennery, Pralet, and Micoud. Now, I did tell you that there were several sectoral impacts in various countries. However, in St. Lucia, we have major adverse impacts on the fisheries sector, the health sector, and the tourism sector. And these adverse impacts have been divided into 3 categories: physical impacts, biological, and socioeconomic. Of course, due to time constraints, I won't go through all, but you can see the range of ways in which sargassum continues to impact the fisheries sector. For example, biological, you have change in fish species caught, change in the sizes of the fishes caught. Socioeconomic, because you now have different sizes and different species, you have different fish prices. And so now fishers even have to work a little harder because people are creatures of habit, and so they may not want the Almo jacks, they may want their flying fish, and so it upsets the balance in so many ways. Of course, tourism sector, you have the unavailability of many water spots. It's aesthetically devastating. It's ugly, it's smelly, it's brown, it's all choked up, and people no longer want to walk or fish or use the beach recreationally. And this, of course, could have serious implications for restaurants and bars and hotels along the coastline. And health, they say if you don't have health, you don't have wealth, so you cannot enjoy the fish and the tourism. So it affects us in so many ways, as I highlighted before. You might have continued exposure, which still has to be studied because the concentrations presently have not been shown to exceed normal levels. However, this is being monitored by the Department of Agriculture. Our Minister of Sustainable Development, who's actually the parliamentary representative for 2 of the communities that I'll be looking at, Micoud and Pralet, has indicated that 3 of the biggest complaints she has received is the smell. You cannot drive by Pralet or Dennery or Micoud and not know that the sargassum is there. It has, of course, affected the livelihoods of the people and the recreational use of the beach. The government of St. Lucia continues to undertake various interventions. In 2017, they established the Sargassum Task Force under the Ministry of Agriculture. This has been met with limited success, and there were a number of challenges like funding and equipment and so forth. The government continues cleanups on a needs basis, assisted by the National Conservation Authority and community members where possible. Under the CC4 Fish project, equipment and tools were provided to village councils to help empower community members to take charge of the cleanups themselves. Also under that project, we have the development of the draft Sargassum management plan in collaboration with UWI. Recently, we also have the development of the National Fisheries Policy, which includes Sargassum management. The Department of Agriculture has also noted the procurement of hydrogen sulfide meters that it will be using to undertake monitoring. And of course, I have regular monitoring here because as persons who work for technical officers within the public sector, we understand our workload. And so you may have the intention to monitor the Sargassum. However, this may lead to being pushed further back because of ongoing work that you have. Additionally, many of these sites, especially those in Grosile, are very far inland and they would require a 4x4 and to get in there, and it's very time consuming. And so there are no dedicated or appointed Sargassum monitors, hydrogen sulfide monitors. So what is this research all about? This research seeks to evaluate community level vulnerability for 3 communities, Denri, Miku, and Prale. It is going to employ a community-based participatory approach. I will seek to develop appropriate indicators for the 3 components of vulnerability I highlighted, namely exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. These will then be aggregated to develop a combined indicator or vulnerability index for each community. And so now we can have adaptive planning at the community process. Okay, and this is, we can skip this. This was just another paraphrasing of what I highlighted previously as the research summary. So we're looking at a participatory vulnerability analysis to characterize community vulnerability to pelagic Sargassum influxes. My research has 5 main objectives. The first one, as I indicated, is to identify appropriate indicators for the 3 components of vulnerability: exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. Then we will create a composite vulnerability index to characterize that vulnerability. The third thing we're going to look at is what are the economic, social, and environmental drivers that influence or guide appropriate actions for adaptation. Number 4, which makes me most excited, is where we're going to hear from the community members themselves. I have termed it the voice of the invisible, to effectively communicate how they think and feel to the policymakers. And at the end, all of these will be put together to create a conceptual framework for community-specific adaptation and management plans for pelagic Sargassum that will feed into the current draft national management plan. And so, as we wrap up, I am now in my methodology phase where we'll be actually doing the data collection. Of course, this has been halted to some extent by COVID. Nevertheless, we press forward. We're adopting a mixed methods approach where we'll be using both quantitative and qualitative methods. Under the quantitative method, we have the community or household surveys and the census data. These will lead to developing the composite indicators. And under qualitative, we have our key informant interviews, our focus group meetings, and the voice of the invisible that will be used to contextualize the numbers that we have. And so at the end of it all, we hope to further analyze the data, submit do the write-up, do the various seminars, the defense, and see this research completed. For me, research, like Albert says, is to see what everybody else sees, but to think what no one else has thought. And it is my hope that through this research that St. Lucia can be further put on the map, and we can be used as an example to extrapolate further community vulnerability analyses for the Caribbean. These are my references, and I thank you for listening.
Thank you very much for your very detailed presentation, as you say, the research project itself. And I'm sure that those of us who are familiar with Sargassum, perhaps just sees just the nuisance element of it, but clearly one has to examine the pros and cons, particularly as they have an impact on the communities which are in close contact with that resource. In fact, as was discussed by Shelian Cox earlier, we have to see it as one of the marine resources right now. So I will open now for questions from our colleagues. I have one question so far, which I will just ask. There is a question to you from Cuthbert Nathaniel, and he asks, if given that Sargassum is such a nuisance, if it were to remain on the high seas, how long before it sinks to the seabed? That's part one. And he wants to find out about the impact on decreased catch of flying fish. I think that was raised earlier by Shelian Cox.
Yes.
Can you comment
So
on this?
right. The first question is how long it can stay out onto the sea, right? Before it actually gets beached.
Right.
Right. Okay. Now that would depend on your sea state. That would include your wind direction, your wind speed, and your ocean currents. It has been shown to get there right away. We have forecasting equipment now that can show it leaving the coast of West Africa and making its way. So we could say in about 2 to 3 months it will get here. But again, this depends on, you may have a tropical storm that makes it get here faster or takes it off course. And so we cannot say definitively how long it would take here, but we can use predictive models to say what time it is expected to arrive. Your second question was what? Sorry?
It's the impact on decreased catch of flying fish.
Right. Okay. So just like human beings, animals have their preferred environmental space. Now, Sargassum has been shown to be associated with certain species, particularly juveniles, because it serves as a nursery and a spawning ground. It also protects them from larger predators. And so juveniles, that's why the sizes of the fish are actually smaller when they're associated with, when you catch them with Sargassum. However, the Sargassum itself tends to attract your almos, your jacks, and your mahi-mahi or your dolphin fish. It has been shown not to really encourage flying fish. We're not too sure why, but because of this new environment now, the fish no longer come as they came before. And this has had a significant impact on the economy of many places that rely heavily on flying fish, for example, Barbados. As to say why explore fish behavior, I guess more research would have to be done in that type of in that area. I cannot speak to that because I'm not a fisheries expert. However, it's a nice gap and it would make for some good research. Yes. Any other questions?
Yes, while we're waiting, I just want to ask one. While your preliminary research and assessment does focus on communities, is there any sense of the impact on the social life of communities in terms of the access to the resource, the beach resource, as for recreation and so forth?
Okay. this is these are some of the things we hope to answer through the community survey. I'm aware that UN-ECLAC is doing a socio-economic study on the impacts of sargassum in various Caribbean countries. However, you'd understand that the beach plays a very significant role psychologically for people of the Caribbean. We enjoy as we drive by, we can look at the blue ocean, the blue sky, it's therapeutic. Additionally, we like the freedom of knowing that anytime we can go for a swim, a dip. In addition, the beach also has religious activities for purposes for certain groups of people, like a certain religious sects would use it for baptism, and so it has truly horseback riding, just relaxing after a hard week. And so this has had a significant impact on people's psychological and mental well-being, knowing that I can no longer use this space. I know the Prana Beach was very famous for beach parties and cook-ups and so forth, and now people can no longer do that. They're repelled by the scent and the sight. And so this has had a significant, not just a livelihood impact on the social behavior of people.
Okay, I have a few questions. The first one is the sargassum problem a threat to the burgeoning sea moss industry? Does it affect the growth of sea moss at the sea moss farms?
Okay. Does it affect sea moss?
Yes, sea moss production.
Sargassum is viewed primarily as a threat to the people when it gets onshore, and this is what my research focuses on. As it relates to when it is waterbound, the fishers would tell you yes, because it gets in the engines, it damages the fishing equipment. Additionally, it makes it very difficult to get to established fishing sites. As it relates to its effects on sea moss, I'm afraid I cannot speak to that and its current impact. Okay. I know it affects fisheries in other ways, like I mentioned, the gear, the equipment, the engines, the fishing side, the fish stock themselves, the species, the ecosystems. But if it can affect coral reefs, just a hypothesis here, and it can affect the seagrass beds, perhaps it can get entangled, because I know they plant it out into the open ocean. Perhaps it can get entangled in these areas and make it worse. But you would have noticed that this year we've had a little lull in sargassum, and it's expected to return like March, April, based on the summer conditions. And so there are times it would have different effects on different industries based on the quantity and the time.
Intervention from Clarence Henry of the OECS said, thanks for the presentation. Interested in understanding your thoughts on sargassum. May in fact lead to a net positive effect. This may in fact influence your engagement with the selected communities. Can you comment?
Yes, a very good question. Thank you for that. Critical to this research is something called transformational adaptation, where we want to use something that was once viewed as negative to bring about benefits to everyone, particularly to the poor. So for example, part of this research involves asking the people, what would you like to see happen? What would you have liked to use the sargassum for? And what sort of support would you have needed? So for example, right there in January, Algas, you would need your collectors, you would need your baggers, you need the truckers to carry them, you would need persons to I guess take them out when they're finished, wash them, dry them. And so you have a whole burgeoning industry. And so people that now viewed it as a negative thing can actually see it as a blessing. And so this is one way to deal with it, just like with the sea lion concept. In other words, you take something that was viewed as negative and you make it into something. This is closely tied with equitable resilience, where you now have resilience across the board. And again, we're targeting the poor and the marginalized so that no one is left behind. So a fisherman who has now lost his livelihood because of the sargassum can go into an alternative livelihood now and look at maybe using the sargassum for composting, using the sargassum for biogas digesters instead of pig manure. And so because it's fairly new, it allows for room for innovation and creativity and exploration of new uses. So a very good point. It's something we'd like to move towards, to allow persons to view it not so much as a nuisance, but what you can use it for. However, one challenge to this is the unpredictable nature of sargassum. While we have the forecasting models, there is no guarantee that it's here to stay. So you don't want to invest in a large biogas initiative and then after 3 years it has stopped coming. And so what happens to your profits and your loss and that sort of thing? So thank you, Dr. Henry, for your point, and I hope it was answered. For your question, I hope it was answered.
Okay, any comments from the Zoom floor? There is a comment from Cuthbert Nathaniel who says, because flying fish requires floating objects to lay its eggs, one can expect the flying fish to lay its eggs in the sargassum. Prior to the influx of sargassum, the stock of flying fish was already reduced. Perhaps that's for another set of experts to comment on.
Yes, perhaps. Yes, I'm sorry, I'm not able to speak about sargassum, and I just can report that the certain fish species and sizes and composition has changed, but as to why exactly, we might have to delve a little deeper into fish behavior and pelagics and that sort of thing. Yes.
Okay, so let me, if there are no further questions, let me thank you both here for your presentation.
Yes.
Clarence did say thanks for the response. It was very clear.
Okay,
and I'm sure the others who asked questions got the response of COVID that you will probably find some.
Dr. Charles, and as the research progresses, yes, I have opportunity.
Thank you. Presentation by Crispin and Disaster Resilience, speaking on the Eastern Caribbean Solar Challenge in the fields of fisheries and environment officer. In that bachelor's degree in the development studies, natural resource from the University of the West Indies, Keeville campus.
Thank you, Chair. And good day, everyone.
Good day.
I'm going to confirm that you see my screen.
Confirmed.
Okay, thank you. I'm trying to put it into presentation mode now. Okay, good. Sorry about that. All right. So thank you again for being here today. And I'm going to speak on the Eastern Caribbean's Solar Energy Challenge. It is, we're looking at demonstrating climate leadership under the Caribbean NDC Finance Initiative, or Ndcfi. And once again, it's a pleasure. So without further ado, well, in terms of background, I think it is well known that the OECS is particularly, the OECS region is particularly vulnerable to climate change. And member states are striving to build climate resilience and to transition to low carbon economies. Our sovereign member states, that's like our independent member states, are seeking to implement and enhance their nationally determined contributions, or NDCs, under the Paris Agreement, while the UK overseas and the French territories are pursuing complementary strategies. Despite the minuscule greenhouse gas emissions, for example, St. Lucia in 2010, I think it was emitted 0.0015 or 1% of global emissions. Our member states aspire to demonstrate leadership by pursuing aggressive emission reduction targets. The socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are particularly harsh on small island economies with limited fiscal room to maneuver and heavy dependence on tourism. And with those reasons in mind, bilateral support and private investments in the green recovery are critical. Now, if we use the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions of the respective member states, as a point of departure, I think we can start to look at what some of the needs are, well, what some of the targets were with regard to emissions reduction, and also look at what is needed to actually operationalize these. Now, let me hasten to say that I'm using the first NDCs or the initial NDCs of the member states because some countries have actually released the second NDCs like Grenada and St. Lucia, but I think that I used a snapshot of the initial NDCs to I can reuse that for a particular reason, which I'll explain for in a while. Sorry. So if you look at Antigua and Barbuda, their first NDC was submitted in January 18. They're looking at energy efficiency standards for efficiency standards for importation of all vehicles and appliances. Finalize technical studies to construct and operationalize a waste-to-energy plant, achieve an energy matrix with 50 megawatts of electricity from renewable sources, etc. Dominica looked at reducing its emissions by 17.9% of 2014 levels by 2020, 39.2% of 2014 by 2025, and 44.7% of emissions of 2014 by 2030. Grenada, 30% of 2010 levels, 40% by 2025, and 40% of 2010 emissions by 2030. St. Kitts, 22% business as usual. In other words, what it would have been if there had been no efforts to control emissions in 2025. So to reduce those by 2025, 35% by 2030. St. Lucia, 16% by 2025, 23% compared to BAU by 2030. And St. Vincent looking at 22% of business as usual compared to 2010 by 2025. So as you can see, they're quite some quite ambitious targets in terms of emissions reduction, reducing the emissions of greenhouse gases that contribute to global climate change. Now, when we look at the sectors, what are the key sectors that were considered in the NDCs? First of all, energy, the power sector, so to speak. That's by far the most important sector. The next important one is transport. There was also water, land use, waste management, and agriculture. These are some of the other sectors considered in the NDCs. But if you look again at continuing with respect to mitigation, sector targets and costs, and looking at the estimated costs of implementing the NDCs for mitigation alone, that's reduction of emissions, not talking about adaptation at all, talking purely mitigation. Antigua and Barbuda, $220 million US by 2030, 99 million for Dominica by 2030. Grenada, 161 million US through 2025. St. Kitts not stated, 218 million through 2030 for St. Lucia. St. Vincent and the Grenadines not stated. Now, if you tally these up, now let me just also state that the common consensus is that the estimates were on the conservative side. But if you look at those figures, these 2015, 2016 NDCs, and given the estimates, we're talking about we'll be probably talking somewhere close to $1 billion US needed to implement all the NDCs. Now, one of the reasons I use the initial NDCs and not updated like for Grenada and St. Lucia is that apart from the need for comparability, but also to indicate that thus far, it is fair to say that the bulk of those resources, those financial resources required to implement those NDCs has not yet flowed into the region. And it is also worth noting that the NDCs by most countries were conditional. In other words, were contingent on the receipt of external resources to support implementation. In other words, we want to do this, but we can only do this if we get the support we need. So, recognizing that energy and renewable energy is a key component of NDCs, and most countries, all the countries, so to speak, are looking to scale it up. An increase in renewable energy not only reduces dependency on expensive energy imports, but can also create much commitments. While the use of solar energy is gaining traction, private sector engagement and the further development of a deliberate private sector role in the implementation of NDCs remains limited, as does business awareness of NDCs more generally. In fact, over the years, the tendency has been to believe that governments have the primary responsibility for climate change in general and for addressing it. So, I mean, the perception is that, okay, you go to Paris, you go everywhere and negotiate. So, it is your job to do it. But we've also recognized that the resources needed and which would be pursued by government from bilateral and multilateral sources to implement those NDCs has not necessarily been forthcoming. So there is a role for the private sector. And at the same time, the need for significant private investment to fund the transition to climate resilient, renewable energy powered economies that enable sustainable development while rapidly and effectively reducing greenhouse gas emissions is commonly recognized. So it is, that is coming to the fore now. People recognizing that governments can't do it alone. There's a role for private sector engagement. Several initiatives and partnerships to catalyze private financing for renewable energy, RE, and energy efficiency projects are underway, including support for the preparation of investment projects, but still significant funding gaps remain. So, with that said, we now look to our solar energy initiative for the Eastern Caribbean. But you may well ask, why solar? Why not wind? Why not, wave energy, etc.? Now, without any prejudice to those other forms of renewable energy, increasing the use of renewable energy to effectively reduce greenhouse gas emissions demonstrates energy and climate leadership, but solar in particular is increasingly accepted as a viable and price competitive alternative source of energy. And the prices of, for example, solar panels has decreased sharply and continues to decrease with time. It is scalable from household to grid scale. In other words, you can put a 1 kilowatt or half a kilowatt panel on a house, on a street light, or you can build multi megawatt scale solar systems. Solar offers opportunities to engage stakeholders at all levels. So we're talking about private sector, government, households. So it has wide application across society. It provides visibility for climate action taken. When you install a solar panel, it can be seen by everyone. It generates measurable results. Some of you who live in St. Lucia might recall the data panels or the informational panels on the systems at the National Trust Building and the one on the Castries Market and even the Marshall Community Center, which is displayed here. And so you can measure the results. You can see how much has been generated both over time and what is being generated now. It can come in the form of hurricane-proof installations that promote both climate mitigation and resilience. In other words, solar panels can help, for example, hospitals, hurricane shelters, etc., to continue to function even during a hurricane. And so they can fit into what you call mitigative adaptation or adaptive mitigation, depending how you look at it. In addition, there's an existing and growing pool of expertise in the region. Just recently, through a project that the OECS implemented, 150 or so participants or persons were trained in the OECS in solar installation. So we're looking now at an Ndcfi initiative for collective leadership on solar energy. So what is the Ndcfi? Okay, the Caribbean NDC Finance Initiative is a joint initiative of the OECS Commission and the government of St. Lucia. It was established in 2017 with political support from the UNFCCC, that's the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, and under the auspices of the Global NDC Partnership. And I never tire of thanking the German corporation GIZ for the kind support in helping us to get the Ndcfi off the ground. The Ndcfi aims to advance and accelerate NDC implementation and the Caribbean climate action, and has initiated a non-traditional engagement that includes governments, development partners, and the private sector. You'll recall my saying earlier that the private sector has not traditionally been involved in those conversations. Now, through an Eastern Caribbean solar initiative, the Ndcfi aims to contribute to the region's efforts to implement NDCs and complementary actions. So what will be the aim and objective of an Eastern Caribbean solar initiative? Well, the aim is to increase deployment of renewable energy technologies in support of national, regional, and global goals to increase climate resilience and towards keeping global temperature increase within 1.5 degrees Celsius as called for under the Paris Agreement. The objectives are to raise awareness about renewable energy options and promote opportunities to take action that demonstrates energy leadership. Galvanize action geared towards contributing to the Eastern Caribbean's efforts to transition to a low-carbon economic zone through a participatory approach. Establish the Eastern Caribbean as a region dedicated to climate solidarity and action, and solidify the Ndcfi as a platform that delivers meaningfully on climate action. So the proposed approach is to secure bilateral support and investment in small to medium scale solar installations in public facilities, solicit and secure private sector investment in small and medium scale PV installations on private facilities in the Eastern Caribbean, solicit and foster public and private sector measures to support and facilitate the deployment of solar in the Eastern Caribbean. So with that, I'm happy to introduce the Eastern Caribbean Solar Challenge. That is the official name that we've adopted. And so just to explain the strategic approach. So firstly, we're looking to secure bilateral support in small to medium scale solar. So for example, we're looking to establish a grant window that is open to all legitimate pledges and directly solicit bilateral and multilateral partners to contribute. For example, you can request country X to provide one installation for a public facility in each of its allied member states in the Eastern Caribbean. Okay, and the benefits will be direct contribution to national NDC and renewable energy targets, recognition for donor and the member state, increased sense of ownership, etc. Then to solicit and secure private sector investments in SMS installations, small and medium scale installations. So you establish a private sector window that is open to all private sector pledges for action in the private sector. For example, invites Bank X to install a PV system on at least one of the buildings that it owns in each member state where it operates. And then, so there'll be direct contributions to the targets, corporate social responsibility recognition, green leadership, branding, so to speak, or recognition, and so on. And financial benefit to the private sector. In other words, we're not asking you to do this for charity, do this for yourself. Of course, if you want to contribute to a public sector facility, that's welcome as well. Then we're looking to solicit and foster private sector and public sector measures to support and facilitate the deployment of solar in the Eastern Caribbean. So for example, we will look at establishing a facilitation window and open to financial and allied institutions, insurance, and also government. For example, the indigenous banks in the Eastern Caribbean could jointly announce a special loan facility, or they could do it individually as well. So we can say, well, as at least I know one finance facility in St. Lucia has done, they established a special finance facility. Another bank has indicated informally that they're willing to support the challenge by establishing a loan facility. That's a commercial bank, a loan facility for householders who want to put PV on their homes. Okay, so that will be an indirect contribution, but it would also contribute to the targets in the long term. Now, the additional point is that for government, we're asking governments now to also make announcements or pledges to support. For example, let's just say they decide that they could announce that they'll give an income or corporate tax rebate for installations on houses and so on. So that would ease the financial cost of installing by you can get some reimbursement or rebate for having that. And insurance companies, from going back to private sector, could also, for example, have special packages for people who wish to insure their PV installations. And the last component, because we want to leave nobody out, is to foster action at the household level and to establish a household individual window to encourage households to register their actions, to take advantage of the loan facilities and other facilities made available by government and the private sector. So some critical next steps. So we have already started our engagement with key partners and stakeholders. So we're going to scale this up. Now, this is not necessarily sequential, or it's not necessarily in this order. Some of these actions are taking place in parallel. We want to ensure conceptual and technical robustness. In other words, one of the things that we know from in the region is that when some solar installations have gone to seed, in the sense that they've been established, they start running them, maybe the monitoring panel, goes dead, it's not maintained, there isn't routine maintenance. And so we don't want that to happen, where things that, systems are put on public buildings in particular are not maintained. So these are some of the things that we're trying to address. We're trying to make sure that that the whole challenge is fit for purpose at the national level. to make sure that governments and so on, that we are sensitive to the policy limitations or the policy constraints and so on in the respective countries. We also want to, one of the things is we want to put together a robust system for monitoring the fulfillment of pledges and promises, so we can get something measurable. And related to that, we are looking ideally to set up to establish national targets. So, and we putting an initial timeline of the end of 2023 to kind of record our achievements in this regard in terms of shifting the dial. And one of the things that we will do is put a robust monitoring system so that if, say, Bank A, to use my example, installs 25K on 5 buildings or whatever, then that can be recorded. So there's some sort of measuring, reporting, and verification that is robust. And we can see that, if we move the dial by 1 megawatt total installed, then, that is, it's not just something happening in a vacuum, but it's being tracked by someone. And of course, that will require some country level reconnaissance and baselining. So we have to work with our member states to verify, for example, in identifying buildings that will be suitable for the installations, right? And then, of course, we're looking to officially launch a challenge. And like I said, some of the things, even after we launch the challenge, there will be some of the work will be going on. So before and after challenge, after the launch. So these are some of the next steps that we're looking to do, and we'll certainly be working for our member states and with our partners, even more closely as time goes by. So with that, I just want to say the name and the logo will be coming out. You'll be hearing it much more in the coming days and weeks. And with that, I want to thank you.
Well, we want to thank you very much, Crispin, for your contribution. I think it is indeed a challenge. I'm sure we will have questions, so stand by. Considerations to promoting and facilitating solar.
Thanks, Donatien, my friend. Thanks for the question. Well, yes, the idea is that if governments, for example, will put concessions and will agree to take an additional step, for example, put rebates, so on solar installation commercial basis, then hopefully they would be able to get some additional support and additional as far as the policy, and it's not public sector or private sector, but programs and facilities.
Well, it has a lot to do with the sort of overarching institutional arrangements for producing solar energy. Is the legal arrangements related to patching into the grid, and net metering issues and so forth. Going solar to become financially a viable project, you have to go to a scale where you can actually solar up your entire bit of energy.
You're looking at the policy regime. At least one policy, you can only install up to 25 kilowatts on any one facility, right? One private facility. And for some people that is not economic. For some people it's proliferating. You'll see that, despite the limitations, you'll see people installing. Now, one of the other things that is coming to the fore now is the whole issue of agriculture and so on. If you have, for example, have to solarize that, battery power allows, which used to be pretty prohibitive, okay, so you can stand free of the grid. And in fact, that is net metering. Now we have to look at this net metering. It says your meter spins one way, right? When the dial is spinning the other way. So that is one system. Net to lose like in the case of St. Lucia. Net billing where you set in to have that on the system. But despite the limitations, there is scope to do work. And again, some people are choosing to solarize certain aspects. Some people are choosing to solarize their lighting, for example. Some people are, in other words, their flood lighting, etc. Take that off the grid entirely, so to speak. So as I said, there are constraints, there are limitations, and it varies from country to country. But even then, people are choosing to take certain options, go off the grid or no combination.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, can I say something?
Yes, Jez, go ahead.
Thanks for the presentation, Crispin. I just have one question from the perspective of the small person in a rural community. We had a project in Choiseul where 3 of the beneficiaries who had been paying Select as a consumer for 30 years, who was on their family's property for 30 years or so, entered the low income people. Their homes were fully solarized, but they cannot connect to the grid because of the single variable that they do not own the property. Yet they have been living there for 20 and 30 years. I'm trying to understand why this is so. Now, if the argument is that these people have moved from consumers to producers, and that connecting to the Lucia system could cause some kind of variability, voltage, whatever, and so on. Is this the argument, first of all? And if this is the argument, has that really happened in St. Lucia? I'm trying to find a way to get the poor people of St. Lucia connected to the grid in the rural parts of St. Lucia. Yet most of them don't own land. They're on family land. How do we get around that, Crispin? Are there any examples you can help us with?
Jess, thanks for that question. I think, and that's a very, very useful question. Actually, I think that question goes beyond the realms of purely solar, irrespective of the form of energy. The whole issue of land ownership or tenure and the ability to connect to the grid, that is something that will have to be addressed at a wider policy issue, and it goes beyond the immediate scope of what we try to do. But it's a very, very valid question. I think I think also that, you know, when we look at these things, there are questions that go, like I said, purely beyond electrical and power and so on, and go into the whole issue of general access from a broader socioeconomic standpoint. Okay, and I think governments will have to address this, but I think also we have, at least certain solution, we have a National Utilities Regulatory Commission, which may have to take up some of those questions as well. So, but it's a key question. I mean, I've heard the issue about that point about people not being able to connect because they don't own land, and you know, or they don't own the property, and that's a very deep, it's a long-standing issue, and I think it's something that governments will have to take a position with respect to the, you know, how they approach the utilities.
Crispin, can the OECS play a lead role in this by the similar way the OECS has done in the past by creating template legislation for planning and for template or the issue of lower socioeconomic groups accessing such as solar, because it's really a differential that I don't like. It really discriminates and it affects solarization at the rural community level where we work, as you know. And we are trying to, you know, so, and you know the problem in St. Lucia with land. I mean, past prime ministers have studied the issue of land and the complexity of land ownership in St. Lucia, and the issue of family die and that family, great-great-grandfather of the great-great-grandfather of the great and that own it and pass it and so on, you know. So we need to make this an issue that has to be resolved as soon as possible.
Yes, Giles, I fully understand, and I can relate to that. Well, I think, you know, I'll be happy to bring that to my colleagues who, you know, who deal with energy directly. But again, when you look at this, the whole 10, right, 6 years, and they can't, you know, they can't be agreement. Even who is the you know, what's the word again? I'm trying to remember the person who's the executive of another term. So again, it's while it manifests itself in what you're doing with regard to energy, it also, you know, manifests itself, probably needs to be addressed in a broader way. But again, your point is noted, and I would be happy to refer that to my colleagues.
Thank you very much, Crispin. I mean, the questions, and the first one is the relationship between this challenge and the work that was done by the OECS Commission under the acronym for the acronym. But it has to do with the regulation and development of energy. They didn't call it electricity, but the energy sector. And I think some phase of the project was to address the issues of connect has to be resolved, because, you know, right now we have to leapfrog into the future, not do it piecemeal, as Giles was suggesting. There are a lot of small complications which would get in the way that that we haven't, you know, we're not forecasting, and there may be some unintended consequences of some of the other issues, apart from simply the sort of small-scale production issue. But the issues of the framework, the institutional arrangements to which this has to happen. And perhaps you need to give that some.
Even despite the limitations, there is already interest, okay? And for sure, if we're looking even to get let's just say we start with the government, right? Let's just say we're looking at, let's say even if we get 50 to 20, 9 or 10 member states, you're talking about, that's half a megawatt already. Okay, that is significant, not some more. And then I know there's some private people who are interested. Some have already done it, but you know, put solar on. Then you can, despite the challenges. Now, getting back to you on the Sarah thing. Yes, I know, but only 2 countries really followed up with the Sarah. That was St. Lucia and Grenada. I didn't mention Grenada earlier, but NUC has, but in the case of St. Lucia, which I'm most familiar with, the NUC is it has before it. I know there are a number of matters before it that need to be acted upon. So now, so that is something that we will have to that as member states we have to. In fact, one of the things that I made, the points I made earlier was about the whole issue of making sure that it's internally robust. I made the point about trying to ensure that we take into consideration in the respective member states. Because member states may be at slightly different, or in some cases very different, at different stages than others. I know a couple countries have draft legislation, for example, energy legislation that is obviously, so obviously we have to take into consideration where we are. There are limitations. In St. Lucia, it's 25 kilowatts. You're asking you made a point about stability, grid stability, I think, either directly or indirectly when you were talking about small scale. My understanding is that and utility level would still take, just using St. Lucia as an example, any significant grid instability. So I don't think that is a limitation at this point in time. In terms of, at this point, the instability threshold, I will stop it.
Why the situation of a differential in most of whom I went to school with, of course. Sit around a table and put forward ideas like this, and we do not because here you're confirming it as a senior climate change person, and I see what can be done, but I suspect the OECS can play a major role if we can put out at least some recommendations, because I hate to see our brothers and sisters who I can take you to in places like Choiseul and Montrouge and Ndcfi, where they can be solarized just as us up in the north, and we see kinds of reasoning. They meet all the other requirements except that, and there's no interconnection being given. And there are 3 of them in a project we have in Choiseul that has been.
Thank you, Giles. Thank you very much, Crispin. And thanks for all those who presented, who submitted comments and questions on your presentations, and those before. You were the last man reckoning, so and I think you are not out.
Okay, so I carried my bat. It's a pleasure to know that. Good to see you, Chad.
Thank you very much. So we're about to wrap up, and I want to just, as we wrap up, and then I'll invite Leslie to say the final remarks, and we'll close off with our usual 1.5 message through the creative medium. So Giles, can you just give us a few closing remarks, please?
Thank you, Mr. And what a wonderful 2 days this has been, discussing ideas in climate change, our future, the impact of climate change in our futures, from the fisheries sector to the marine sector. And today we are talking about solar. I think these forums are needed in the Caribbean, and it took COVID for us to discover the virtues of virtual discussion and presentations. We at the Jeff Small Grants Program will continue to promote such forums. And as you members are aware, this is on our knowledge fair. We promise the people of St. Lucia to do it every 2 years, funding availability. And I believe this partnership with UWI has proven its dividends, has given us the kind of reception we wanted. We ask our members to tune in for the 2 segments of our Knowledge Fair 2020-2021. Sometime around June will be the 3rd segment, and we're looking forward to a great, sweet finale around December 13th this year, when we are going to have St. Lucia's first national honey tasting competition that will open up a new niche for us in ecotourism and so on. So thanks again, Mr. Chair, for an excellent job done. Leslie, please convey our gratitude and appreciation to your colleagues for this partnership. We look forward to other partnerships of this kind in the future. And hopefully next time we do such a thing, we'll be able to bring our international partners like Microsoft and all the other organizations globally that I'm sure would want to participate. Thank you very much, and best wishes to everybody, and thanks to all the participants for their input.
Thank you very much, Giles. And I want to thank all the participants and presenters. I think the presenters do these presentations. Sometimes it takes a little effort, but I think it's worth it. And thanks, of course, for the interventions from all those who did it, from Leslie Crane, whichever is first. I believe that the video may come first, and then Leslie video. Oh, Leslie is there. So we now invite Leslie to give a closing remark.
Romulus, for all of your kind words. I would like to reiterate what a wonderful 2 days it has been for us here. Of course, they encourage dissemination of that research, and of course, ultimately to seek to promote SGP, UNDP for partnering with the UWI Open Campus and for sponsoring this conference. We could not have done it without you. Giles, for your active participation today. We know that you have been torn between the two, that you made the time to so actively join the National Steering Committee. As a member of our UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Local Organizing Committee, I think we would all agree that Mr. Charles has done an excellent job over the past 3 days, ensuring the smooth flow of events from the opening and on Monday and for over the last 2 days. And Mr. Charles has given yeoman service, and we are very, very grateful for that. Reiterating their dedication to the research that they provided on St. Lucia and, of course, the wider region. And we thank them for answering our call and making their various presentations. Of course, all of these presentations were very stimulating, enlightening, and most importantly, based on solid scientific research. And we look forward to receiving the finished presentations and to working with you towards the publication of the same, and hopefully using them as part of the solution to the many climate change issues plaguing St. Lucia and the wider Caribbean region. So again, thank you, all of our presenters. Without you, there would not have been a conference. Thanking the members of the local organizing committee. Mr. Ember mentioned local party in Walcott for Cox and from Dr. Cedric Van Meerbeek, and we have collective for putting us in touch with Ms. Lena Demwolf, who gave her presentation on climate change and neotropical pollinators. Again, thank you for richly accepting our invitation to be our keynote speaker on Guided on and much again, Dr. Fletcher. Thanking CYEN, an open between the various partners, and also to CYN and to the Jeff, SGP, UNDP, for the use of their various 1.5 to Stay Alive promos. Regional UWI technicians, in particular, Mr. David Foster and his colleagues, Mr. Patrick Miguel Felix and Kevin George, for providing the crucial tech support for all presenters from across the miles. A special thank you to Mr. Richmond Felix and his company, Carib Web, for providing the streaming for the conference. A special thank involved. We thank Ms. Siguthani Bryan, our local marketing officer, all excited, and of course, we thank Accela Marketing for their expertise in ensuring. I do hope I haven't forgotten anyone. A wonderful, wonderful 3 days, and we are supposed to further collaboration with the Jeff, SGP, UNDP, and all of our partners, and we say thank you.
And just to remind you that you have been, in case you didn't realize that, in our region. We have online evaluation, and hope that we see very soon some time to continue discussing these issues which are putting into the development of our region.
Unleash creativity and innovation. Unleash community spirit. Unleash
The People's Knowledge Fair and the UWI Open Campus St. Lucia Country Conference 2021 for conference on the 16th and 17th. That's not all. Experience St. Lucia's first national Honey Bee Show training workshop on the 15th and 16th. Come learn from a leading international expert everything you need to know to compete in December in our first ever National Honey Show. Registration is open now. The People's Knowledge Fair and UWI Open Campus.